people in uniform wandering around earlier.
Welcome to the Police and Crime Committee. Today we will be holding our monthly question and answer session with the Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime and the Metropolitan Police Service. Unfortunately, as yet they have not appeared, so I intend to just hold fire and resume in 5 minutes when hopefully they will have appeared. Right, I shall start the meeting again. Apologies to anybody watching that we're late. Our guests did not appear until now. So I will welcome you again to the Police and Crime Committee. Today we will be holding our monthly question and answer session with the Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime and the Metropolitan Police Service. Please make sure that your electronic devices are switched to silent mode to avoid any interruptions. Can I now ask our clerk, Davina, if any apologies have been received?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies for absence have been received from Assemblymember Desai, for whom Assemblymember Duval is substituting, and apologies have also been received from Assemblymember Russell.
Thank you, Davina. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if members have any other interests to declare?
Noted.
Thank you. Can I ask the committee to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 8th of June 2022 to be signed by me as a correct record?
Confirmed.
Thank you. Can we note the completed ongoing and closed actions arising from previous meetings of the committee and the additional correspondence sent and received?
Agreed.
Thank you. We now move on to our main item of business, the question and answer session with MOPAC and the Metropolitan Police Service. I would like to welcome our guest, Sophie Linden, Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime, although I've been informed that you can only stay till 12. Is that correct? Okay. We're obviously, the panel are not happy about that. Louisa Rolfe, OBE, Assistant Commissioner for Met Operations, MPS, and Laurence Taylor, Deputy Assistant Commissioner for Local Policing of the MPS. Welcome to you all. I'm going to start the questions today, and they're addressed primarily to the Deputy Mayor for Policing. Sophie, were you and the Mayor shocked by the HMI decision to place the Met under special measures?
When we were informed by HMIC through a letter about the Metropolitan Police being put into the engage process, as it is called, disappointed but not surprised. No, we weren't surprised, because many, if not all, of the issues that have been outlined in the letter to us are ones in which we're already aware of, and we already had oversight of and scrutiny of. and also ones on which we've also been driving actions within the Met.
So you weren't surprised?
No, as I said, we were disappointed but not surprised, and we welcome the report and we welcome the MP, as we said last week, the MPS being put into Engage, because with that comes additional oversight and scrutiny, but also additional support through the what's called the PPOG process, the Policing Performance Oversight Group that myself and the Acting Commissioner will be attending next week, which is chaired by Andy Cook, who is the Chief Inspector of Constabulary. The process is, we've had the letter, we've not yet had the draft report, so we've not yet seen the real detail behind the head, I don't mean headlines in media terms, but behind the headlines in the letter, and the process is in the early stages. But I think it will be a supportive and challenging process. It is about Engage, it is about where there are significant concerns about performance within the Metropolitan Police, and about supporting the Metropolitan Police to make the improvements that are necessary.
So when would you say that you first became concerned about issues with the Met?
Well, if we take one of the issues that has been flagged up in the HMIC letter and has been widely reported because it was leaked, and that's why I can talk about it. One of the big issues was about victim support and victim care. Now, we know that the Mayor, in terms of when he came in, we knew that victims were an incredibly important part of Metropolitan Police as well as Criminal Justice Service, and appointed Claire Waxman as Victims Commissioner. Since she has been in, Mopac and myself and her have been working with the Metropolitan Police around victim care, and you have asked me around victim satisfaction on a number of occasions, and we have been seeing that decrease over the years. So it's been a few years that we've had problems with victim satisfaction, and we have published deep dives into, for example, rape. The rape reviews in 2019 with recommendations for recommendations for improvement and good practice. And we have also recently, I've had discussions with Deputy Assistant Commissioner, with Louisa Rolfe as well as Barbara Gray around the witness care units. And there's been a review of the witness care units instigated by the Metropolitan Police off the back of the concerns of Claire Waxman and myself and the discussions that we've had. So if you take that as one of the examples, we've been aware for a while around falling victim satisfaction, and we have been taking action. But clearly more action needs to be taken and improvements need to speed up.
Okay, so you said at some point during that it's a few years. So for a few years you've been concerned about just one area or several different areas?
Well, no, I gave that as an example of one of the areas that was highlighted by HMIC as an area for that they were concerned about. That's an example of it. We have been publishing quarterly performance reports, which is a new thing which were not published in terms of the performance of the Metropolitan Police for a number of years. And through that process of quarterly performance reports, we do deep dives, and MOPAC officers do deep dives and challenges the Metropolitan Police. So, for example, another example given within the HMIC letter was around emergency response and not meeting national standards. This is not a surprise to MOPAC, not a surprise to me. I, in the oversight board that I chair in January, went through the figures around emergency response and challenged the Metropolitan Police around emergency response, and there were actions flowing from that. And HMIC are quite right to pick up on that, and quite right to see that as an area for improvement, as indeed I think is an area for improvement as well.
So really there are areas, quite a few different areas, that you've been concerned about for quite some time?
There are a number of areas that we have picked up through the performance regime, new performance regime that was not in place when I came into office in 2016, and are published quarterly, and are reports that you see as Police and Crime Committee. So there are a number of areas there, yes. So another area that was picked up by HMIC is around stop and search. You know, we have had many discussions at Police and Crime Committee that you have been concerned about stop and search, and there's been a major part of the Mayor's action plan for trust and confidence, particularly with the black community, that oversight and drive to improve practice, and also to improve, to look at the disproportionality within stop and search as well.
Okay. How many officers are there in MOPAC?
There's about 180 officers, but they are not all on oversight, as you know, because MOPAC has a significant arm around commissioning. We commission all the victim services for London, so these are not all officers that are on oversight of the Metropolitan Police. They are officers that are delivering programmes and services for Londoners.
Yeah, I accept that. So, but the other ones have been looking at this, so it does sound as if you've been quite concerned for the last 6 years then.
As I've said with the examples, and I could go through other examples as well, there are areas where we have challenged and we have had challenged and have delivered oversight for the Metropolitan Police. So the issues within HMIC in the letter are not ones in which surprise me or are not new to me.
Okay, so I think it's fair then from the comments you've made that you've been concerned about quite a few areas for quite some time. Is that a fair assessment of what you've just said?
I'm not sure I can say anything else. I've really clearly said the quarterly performance regime has picked up issues.
Yeah, no.
Our oversight has picked up issues. We, for example, on victims, have done deep dives and used our oversight and the research that we do to challenge the Metropolitan Police. We're going to move on as a part of the agenda into the Telephone Digital Investigation Unit. We know what the figures are from that because we, in MOPAC, instigated a victim satisfaction survey specifically for people who are channeled through the TDIU, and through that, and we were going to come on to it, so I don't want to preempt your questions, but through that we have had challenge, oversight and a real view of what is happening within the TDIU, and the Met have responded by putting first of all, they responded by putting in a pilot around phoning people back. That has already proven to be successful and improve the victim satisfaction for those that were a part of the pilot. And that is now, now practiced within the Metropolitan Police. That is I really do think that's because of the oversight and the research and the survey that we have done into victim satisfaction. That's what oversight can do, and we will continue to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's a shame you're leaving early because I don't know that you'll still be here for that. But going back, it does sound to me as if you've been picking up major issues for 6 years.
We've always been looking at issues. That's what oversight is about, and it's for a number of years we have had concerns. However, I would like to say that these concerns aren't all that haven't all been there since 2016. So, for example, one of the things that's been picked up by HMIC is around recording of ASB. Now, in 2018-2019, HMIC gave the Metropolitan Police a clean bill of health on crime data integrity. Their report put their inspection into that, put them at a good, and not just a good, if you like, in the higher rankings of good. So that's been one of the areas where, in terms of prioritisation of our resources, we have relied on the Inspectorate. Now they've come back and things have changed around ASB, so we will pick that up and we will make sure that we have proper oversight in terms of the recording of that. So it is not only myself and MOPAC that had that oversight of the Metropolitan Police. We have also relied on HMIC and the peel inspections. This is the most recent peel inspection that has provided these, put the Metropolitan Police into engage. And we have also relied on the Independent Office of Police Conduct in order with their view into the Met as well, so that the oversight is part of that.
I hear what you say, but then of course the question that has to be posed is, given all of that you have just said, why on earth did you ask for Cressida Dick's contract to be extended? If all of those things were going wrong, and you've told us about quite a few already, and the fact that they've gone back for quite some time, that was what I really wanted to get to the bottom of. If you know there's been all these problems in various different areas, and I assume you had sight of Houghton before, and I mean, we could all name all these various things, why then did you ask the Home Secretary to extend her contract?
So we've been around the block on this before at Police and Crime Committee around the extension of the previous Commissioner's contract. Now, HMIC has been clear in the letter that it's not just the performance issues that have put the Metropolitan Police into engage, but also some of the high-profile incidents that came to light post the extension of the Commissioner's contract. Operation Houghton came to light and was came to the notice of MOPAC and the Mayor and myself in the, those WhatsApp messages that were so appalling came to light far, after the extension of the previous Commissioner's contract. The extension of the contract was one that the Home Secretary, as we know, these are Home Secretary decisions and ones which obviously was discussed with us. Now, there's been a number of things that have come to light since that, and one of the reasons, especially around Operation Houghton, which is why the Mayor lost confidence in her ability to regain the trust and confidence, in her plan to regain the trust and confidence of Londoners.
Well, that doesn't add up, because if all these issues were happening going back quite some time, which you've sat there and said, given that the direction of travel was not good in many different areas, surely then you would have wanted to have changed the person at the top, and the ideal time for that would have been before the contract was renewed.
So, as I said, the HMIC letter to us not only picks up on the performance issues, but also picks up on the high-profile cases that have really undermined and damaged the trust and confidence of Londoners in the Metropolitan Police, and that is the reason the Mayor, in February, and we've been through this on a number of occasions. We went through it at Police and Crime Committee quite soon after the resignation of Cressida Dick. That why the Mayor lost confidence in her ability and her plan to transform, to re-engage with Londoners and improve the trust and confidence in Londoners. The Mayor's been really clear for a long time the need for change. He has the need for change and the need for the Met to put right some of the bread and butter policing issues. He has been very clear about that, and that is why in February he lost confidence in the Commissioner and the ability to transform the trust and confidence of Londoners. But I would say that this is not just about one person, and the Mayor is very clear about this. This is about the leadership of the Metropolitan Police, but it is also about the ability to bring in a reforming Commissioner and the ability of that Commissioner to take expertise, advice, support and capacity from outside to come into the Met to improve it and transform it in the way that is needed, and to work alongside HMIC in doing that.
Yeah, I hear what you say, but it doesn't add up, quite frankly. Just because there's suddenly some high-profile cases, he's got scared, if you like, and then thinks he should act. If things were going so wrong for 6 years, I would have thought that he would not have had faith in the Commissioner earlier.
I would say that I have answered your question about the 6 years. There have been a number of issues, not all of which, as I've been very clear, have been there since 2016. Let us remind ourselves what has happened since 2016. Okay. We have had a number of terrorist incidents. The Metropolitan Police has done extremely well on bringing down violence, and in terms of teen homicides as well. And this is not complacency. So in terms of violence and the proactivity of the Metropolitan Police, there has been some extremely good advances made in that. In the recent years, the issues within the Metropolitan Police, in my view, and clearly in HMIC's view, have got to the point where we needed the Metropolitan Police was put into the engage process. That is post this inspection is long after the resignation of Cressida Dick, but also long after the extension of the contract of the previous Commissioner as well.
I hear the Mayor saying that he welcomes the report and everything else. Are you not somewhat embarrassed about the report? You're the ones that are responsible for overseeing the Met. It's in your job description. Are you not embarrassed that you're in this position?
As I've said very clearly, I welcome this report because it gives very clearly sets out the issues and the challenges that MOPAC has been already had oversight of within the Metropolitan Police. I welcome the Metropolitan Police being put into the engage process because not only does it come with challenge, it comes with support. And I think the Metropolitan Police, we need a reforming Commissioner, but I welcome the support, and we'll find out next week exactly what that support is, and we'll be having discussion. We will continue to have discussions with HMIC. I welcome that support because the Metropolitan Police has got significant challenges. We've had that oversight. The issues within it are not a surprise, but actually it's got to the point where it needs to, the force needs to go into engage. And I would be really clear also, and I'm sure you're well aware of these statistics. There are 6 forces in the engage process. That is 1 in 7 of the forces in England and Wales are in this engage process. This is not just an issue for the Metropolitan Police. There are real significant problems and issues with national policing as well.
If we can just concentrate, as you're supposed to, on the Metropolitan Police, that's what we're here to talk about today. I'm surprised you're not mortified. I certainly would be if I was overseeing something. It's like saying to a head teacher who has had an Ofsted report, you're as low as it can be, it's really bad, and for that head teacher to be saying, oh, that's great, I welcome that. You should be mortified. It's your job to be overseeing this. But you'll just give me the same answer, so I'll ask a different question. Of the 14 fresh significant failings identified by the HMI, what are you most concerned about, and how will you work with the Met to address this?
I'm pausing because that is a difficult question because all of them are important, and I'm pausing to think about. But I'm always most concerned about emergency response because I think the fundamental contract of, and this is why I picked it up in January Oversight Board, I think the fundamental contract of the police to the public, the number one contract is emergency response, and the ability of the police to be there at that moment when 999 is called and to be there to have their calls answered and to be there quickly. That really does concern me, and that's the sort of, when I talk about the basics, that is, the number one issue for me. Well, it's one of the most important issues because it is that fundamental contract, and it also very much feeds into trust and confidence, because if Londoners do not feel that their calls are being answered or the police are responding quickly enough, that does also undermine trust and confidence in the police. But as I said, I pause because victim support and victim care is incredibly important as well. A number of the issues are all important and add up to a whole.
The Metropolitan Police has never ever been put under special measures before. Do you or the Mayor think you should consider your position, because you are the ones overseeing what they're supposed to be doing? And this is a damning report.
As I said, I welcome the report. When you talk, just to go back to your previous question about, the analogy with Ofsted, I would say a head teacher, of course I'm disappointed that the Metropolitan Police is in this position. I'm disappointed on behalf of Londoners because they're not getting the service that they, and the Metropolitan Police, that they deserve. But if you go back to your analogy of the head teacher, one of the things that I would say, if Ofsted came into a school, or HMIC came, as they have come into a force and come into the Metropolitan Police, and what they put with the report and their findings are a complete surprise, that is where I would be incredibly worried. And that is at that point I would be thinking, what has happened? As I have already said, we have already had significant oversight and challenge on many of the issues, if not all of the issues, within HMIC report. And that, for me, shows the oversight that we have been putting in, and the scrutiny has been in the right places. What we need is better action, and we need quicker improvements from the Metropolitan Police.
Well, I've got a number of colleagues waiting to come in. I will just first ask Louisa, what have you said to senior leaders in the Met about the Met being placed in special measures?
Thank you, Chair. We've acknowledged with our senior leaders the cumulative impact of events and challenges that have led the Met to be in this position, and appreciate the impact this has on our communities and their disappointment, and we share that disappointment. Our conversation with senior leaders has been about recognising the work that we are doing and have been doing for some time to address the challenges identified by HMIC, because this is the engage phase relates to a cumulative impact of a number of issues as set out in their letter, many of which are at the forefront of our senior leaders' minds because they are issues. The way the Inspectorate works, it often meets with our people to identify concerns and identify their priority activity, their own assessment of challenges, risks, threats within the organisation. And therefore, these are often, the HMIC report will often be a report back to us about the things that most concern us and what we are really focused on. whilst, you know, the Inspectorate did recognise that there are many things the Met does well, but this is no time for complacency. There has been significant progress on some of the issues mentioned, and we have not yet received the draft report from the HMIC, so we are basing this on the letter. We look forward to receiving their report and working through with them in detail. We take very seriously the opportunity to work with the College of Policing, with HMICFRS and with MOPAC in ensuring that we take this work forward in a very positive way, because we are determined to be a police service that Londoners can be proud of, but also fundamentally that the officers and staff who work incredibly hard every day to keep Londoners safe can feel proud to work in the Met. So this is, and whilst of course we're disappointed, of course we want to be much, much better at this, but we must be positive about the opportunity to take this forward and improve. And recognise that this is a cumulative impact of, and HMIC themselves are very clear about their peel inspection process. It brings in a number of inspections that have taken place over the last few years, and therefore, we are not complacent when we receive a report that addresses and identifies a recommendation, an area for improvement. We get on and strive to improve that. This process will bring additional scrutiny and additional support in ensuring that we do improve in the way that we set out to do, and we welcome that additional support. But our conversation with senior leaders is about us really positively taking this forward, striving to improve and being confident of those improvements.
Okay, thank you. I've got lots of colleagues that want to come in. I'll go over now to Assembly Member Duval.
Look, the headline figures and individual investigations of events, I understand that. I understand what the Met stance is, I understand what the Mayor's stance is, but I think arising from this Inspectorate's intervention is the basics, the performance issues, and particularly the deterioration in performance over a period of time. Some of it a short period of time. I think you, Sophie, mentioned around ASB. We got a sign-off from the Inspectorate saying all was well, and then since then something has gone terribly wrong with one aspect of ASB and recording of ASB. So, in that sense, what's the thinking of why, on some of the issues, from the Peel report, why has there been in those issues identified by the Inspectorate, this is to you, Assistant Commissioner, of that deterioration over the short period of time? Not all of them, I realise. There is a long period of time, some is short. So what's your initial thinking of that, and where is the MPS on that?
So, of course, we really do want to understand, and when we receive the detailed report from HMICFRS, we can fully get to the detail as to how they formed their assessment and understand, and we want to bring in external scrutiny as well to assist us in ensuring that we don't assume, or we know how to do that, we can fix it. Talking about antisocial behaviour and crime recording, so crime data integrity, it is absolutely fundamentally important that Londoners have confidence that we record crime accurately. But to reassure you about antisocial behaviour incidents. So what HMIC have identified here is not every incident of antisocial behaviour reported to us results in an appropriate classification of crime being recorded. But every one of those incidents is captured on our system. Every one of those incidents influences our tasking of officers, our assessment of antisocial behaviour, and ensuring that our neighbourhood teams are focusing on addressing those problems with problem-solving activity. But clearly that isn't good enough, because also victims of crime should be confident that we understand and we record crime, because crime pattern analysis will then help us understand the threats we face as an organisation. So I do not wish to give an excuse here, but to reassure you that we want to seek to understand, and that we are already taking steps on the basis of the information we have to date. We are taking steps to go further to understand. We are looking at our approach to date on these issues. Is there more we can do? Can we bring in additional external scrutiny? But of course, we want to have the full report from HMIC to look at it in detail.
So the Chair mentions 14 fresh issues. Is that one of the 14 fresh issues that maybe wasn't on the radar of the MPS or on MOPAC's radar because it come up because the inspection appeal report said, actually, we think this is all right, it's going in the right direction. 2019, you had that report. What has happened? I don't quite get that. Is that one of the areas that's caught you unaware, or is that one of the areas that you were aware of the non-recording of ASB?
So when I received the full report, I'd need to come back to you on that particular issue, because of course we do monitor our performance around crime recording. So whether this was a complete surprise in terms of that particular issue or not, it's certainly very different from the last inspection, and therefore it is a more recent deterioration of performance. But I would need to come back to you on at what point we ourselves have identified that.
Okay, right. So let's go back to the basics then. The letter that you've got that you now put into one side because you're going to get a different report or a tweaked report from the Inspectorate to work on, and that's what you're waiting to receive, correct?
So the letter is a letter that sets out a very high-level, brief summary of issues. The report is the full report that sits beneath that. It's not a different report. It is we are awaiting the full report so that we don't rush off to action without fully understanding all of the issues HMIC have identified.
When do you think you're going to get that full report? When have the Inspectorate said that you're going to receive that revised report, or a report that helps you understand what the issues are?
So it's imminent. I've been monitoring my emails before coming here, anticipating it may arrive. We have not to date received it, but I'm hoping it's within days.
And you would be happy, the MPS MOPAC, to share your response to to the Inspectorate to their letter, because there's some problems. I'm not sure if you're aware of it. The Inspectorate doesn't want to share their letter at this stage with this committee because they want to go back into what they've written to you. I don't know if they're double checking just to check their facts. Who knows how that process works? But we're very keen to see the letter rather than rely on leaks to the press, to be honest, because we will we don't want to be forced to make judgments about your performance based on leaks. We want to see the hard facts and the evidence that back it up, and we also want to see your response. So, are you, in terms of the MPS, in a position to say, regardless whether the Inspectorate wants to share its response to us when it finally gets around to doing one, which is imminent, you tell me, are you going to share your response back to them with this committee?
So I imagine that our response would be a matter of public record. There is a process through which HMIC go through, and of course the leak is somewhat outside of that process. But the process as it stands would be that what we're anticipating is HMICFRS's draft report that they would share, as they would with any force, for checking for factual accuracy. Because of course you'll appreciate an inspection process involves speaking with many people, looking at many things, and there may be things that are factually inaccurate that we would want to, and we would have an opportunity, and we have a matter of weeks within which to check the fine detail in that report. We would then respond to HMICFRS, which might be about, you've counted a number here and we think it's actually this, and here's the evidence to show that it's this, not that. It's unlikely to change fundamental findings, but it might be something they would want to take into consideration because there are principles they adhere to in their reports around objectivity, around focusing on efficiency and effectiveness of policing services, and we would seek to support them in that endeavour. At that point, once they've received our factual accuracy report, they would seek to publish their report, and we would have a number of days within which we must provide a response to areas for improvement and recommendations and causes for concern. And it is the cumulative impact of causes for concern. Now, within their letter, as you've seen, they refer to the cumulative impact of a number of causes for concern that are in reports already published. So there are some of these things are already in the public domain, and we are well aware of them, and we are working to address them. But of course, this offers us an opportunity to ourselves look at these things as a whole across the Met and ensure that our responses to those, that we already have in train, the cumulative impact of those responses add up to the effect we want to achieve of being the best we can be, of addressing the matters of confidence. I hope that answers your question.
So one of the accusations against you in terms of the leaking of it is that Met's in denial of the problems that it faces. It doesn't respond quickly enough. It doesn't respond quickly enough or change practices quickly enough in terms of when those practices have been identified that need changing. That there is an arrogance of the MPS, a London arrogance, you could say. Us politicians ain't immune from that in terms of that, but an arrogance in the MPS towards change or suggestions from outside the organisation. Is that a part of some of your thinking in terms of responding to this, or are you just not you just don't deal with that? Because it's hard to say what the evidence is. I mean, I'm not an inspector. I'd be sitting in a room and maybe saying these things to you. You may be not listening or counteracting those arguments. How does the MPS think about challenging those issues or accepting those issues?
From our perspective, this is a time for us to be humble, for us to listen, for us to grasp the opportunity of that external scrutiny and the offers of help. The very positive opportunity that comes with the engaged process is the offer of help from the National Police Use Council, from the College of Policing, from MOPAC and others, to ensure that, policing, people are incredibly hardworking and incredibly proud of what they do. And we all need to check ourselves to ensure that and criticism hurts, whatever job you do. And we need to ensure that our personal reaction in responding to that is to do it with our eyes and ears open and to listen to those who want to help us and to ensure that we take forward the opportunity. And so, of course, we are alive to those issues you raise. Of course, I should have seen headlines in the media that suggest we are defensive, that we are arrogant. It's something that, cuts at the core, and we do not want to respond in that way. And we are determined that that will not be a characteristic of our response here. This is a wonderful opportunity to work more closely with our communities in London, to provide the policing service they deserve, and for our officers and staff who work so hard every day and are so proud of what they do, for them to hold their heads up high and to know that their activity makes a difference and they are supported in their leaders, and when they get things right, they are defended for what they do well, but that we support them in addressing our requirement to learn and improve.
Okay, so let's go back to one of the characteristics I said about responding in real time rather than in not Greenwich Mean Time or anything like that in terms of some of the issues that have been raised. Clearly you don't stand still. If there's a problem, you move in and correct it. Of course there's a deliberation process in. You may change what you did in the short term or whatever. Is that the plan on some of these issues? Are you going to try and deal with them? There's a lot of work that you've said that have gone into some of these issues already. What's the thinking about dealing with the time issue, that it takes so long to get things done and to change some of these practices or get the action required to bring it back into the real world in some ways, the real world of tackling crime?
So I think that these are some of these issues are complex and wicked problems that affect, as Sophie said, policing nationally. So, for example, whilst demand 101 call demand across policing nationally has remained relatively static, what we do know is that some of the improvement activity policing has put in place to ensure that we better understand the risk faced by vulnerable people, we respond more effectively to missing people, particularly children. We use the Thrive Plus risk assessment process to ensure that we manage investigative opportunities. We know that's added a lot of time to each call. So whilst the volume of 101 calls have not gone up, the demands in our call centres have gone up dramatically for good reason, and our people are facing pressure. 999 demand has gone up nationally too, and is on a trajectory of continuing to increase. To improve that and ensure that we have the most efficient, effective processes, and to ensure that we worked hard, because I recognise, as Sophie said, that many Londoners speak to our 101 call centre every day, and every interaction is an opportunity for us to improve confidence, to improve people's satisfaction with the service they receive from the Met, to do the right thing, to grasp opportunities, to investigate, to support and safeguard the vulnerable. We must get that right, but we've got to understand the issues that enable us to get that right as well, and do that in a way that takes our people with us, that we provide the effective support. And some of that will be about the right infrastructure, the right data, improving technology, and these things are not always quick fixes. So what we're seeking to do is identify what must we do immediately and what might take longer term, what might require investment, but also look across the Met as a whole, because as Sir Tom Windsor said in his State of Policing report in March of this year, the demands upon policing far outstrip the capacity and capability policing has to deliver. So we have some tough choices about what policing stops doing, because if you look at the requirements upon policing over the years, they've grown and grown and grown. There's never been a do less of that. And whilst, of course, the growth and investment in policing is incredibly welcome, the 20,000 officer uplift nationally, what HMIC will identify is that also presents challenges of a less experienced workforce. A lot of our effort at the moment is around increasing as quickly as we can the skills, knowledge, capability of new people coming in, supporting them to be the best they can be. These are not things that are easy to do overnight, but we are really determined to do it, and to do it in a thoughtful way. Often you talked about action not being quick enough. We know in policing often our instinct is to respond incredibly quickly. We have to have a balance here of understanding those issues that require immediate remedial action and those that require a more thoughtful response.
Okay, so in your response back to the Inspectorate, will you be outlining that approach in terms of saying, right, that's going to take a little bit longer, that's there, this is what we've done immediately now, but we'll review it in light of how you come back to us or how the policing family comes into support? Will that be very clear in terms of what the product, if I can call it, of the intervention that you're going to push back, not push back as in against what's being said, but in terms of the action that you're going to be taking in the future, what you're taking now? Is that going to be part of that framework of response?
I'm sure it will be, yes.
Okay, so let's go for one of the longer term issues that's been difficult. So this committee, and members of this committee were around at the time, some will be new. The Child Abuse Command was not the Met's finest hour. Do you know what I mean? The interventions there, the role of the Inspectorate, working with your good selves in identifying problems to probably the most vulnerable in our society, people that haven't got a voice in that sense. Some of the stories and some of the practices were pretty horrendous, and that, you know, influenced people's lives once they you know, as they become victims and continue to become victims, sadly, in terms of circumstances. Okay, that was going from about 2017, 16, 17, let's say, right? The Met instituted measures. We're going to come to MOPAC because MOPAC played a very important role. There was a willingness and understanding of what the problems were, and you almost had monthly meetings at one stage with the Inspectorate in overseeing it, and everyone played a role in dealing with that. That's cited in the Inspectorate's letter to a degree of one of the reasons for intervention, amongst many others, but this was one of those issues. Has something materially gone wrong in recent times then? Because the Inspectorate pulled back some of those monthly meetings, 6 monthly meetings yearly. You went off the radar, which for a layperson would presume that everything is back on track. We're actually delivering the service that we can be proud of, and we're on top of these issues, protecting the most vulnerable in our society. Why is that in the letter, do you think?
So my understanding, but of course when we get the full report, I'll have a more detailed understanding. But my understanding is this relates to a specific issue of online child sexual abuse
Imaging.
And that is one of those issues that we have been working on and taken some immediate action. And I think the inspection report that identified persistent backlogs is some months ago. We are now very confident we've reduced those dramatically and sustained a much smaller number, but we can't be complacent here. I want to understand with the Inspectorate whether there is more we must do in that area, but I don't think they're suggesting that we've gone back on any of those, hard-won improvements that have been put in place since 2016. But we have to, this is a really critical, high-risk area of business that we must get right, and we must continue to get right. And my understanding is that we have made significant improvements, and we must now sustain those, but also not assume that we have resolved the problem.
Okay. Thank you for that. I've got one last question, Chair. So back to you, Deputy Mayor, in terms of that MOPAC's role. So we understand what the police process is, and clearly people are raising questions about MOPAC. What did you do? It was on your watch, here it was, and everything else. So we've got this letter going back, or this response going back to the Inspectorate because of their process that they're in. Are you thinking of either adding to that process that the letter that goes back to the Inspectorate talks about MOPAC's role in all those issues? Because I think we're quite clear MOPAC's role on the headline figures of what you've done. You've rightly said this is unacceptable, we can't go on. These individual events, investigations, practices that have been called out, you've rightly been there. What we need to understand is the bits that where sort of behind the scenes, where you may have been working or may not have been working, we need to understand what you've been doing. So on the child abuse issue, I'm quite clear about, because I sat as a member of PCC and followed that debate in terms of you answering questions and others about that in terms of actions you were taking to right those issues. So presumably we've got an audit trail of MOPAC's involvement of all those issues about where you can. There may well be some new ones that we didn't quite know, but you picked up the ones recently. I think you referred to your contribution of where you saw something in the quarterly data monitoring that you intervened and said, right, we've got to do something about that. Let's move those actions. Is that a separate letter to us, or is that something jointly that you put into the Inspectorate? Because it's not necessarily you being asked to account for your actions, it's the MPS in terms of those actions. How do you see that in terms of going forward about the role of MOPAC and the role of yourselves in that sense? You're not defensive and you're not shying away from the problem. I get that in terms of the way that you're engaging with us. What's your thinking about actually trying to put the right the factual information in the public domain?
So I'm just trying to think through that question. The process, as Louisa Rolfe has already outlined, is clearly, and I don't want to sound flippant about this, but clearly HMICFRS has inspected the Metropolitan Police. It's not an inspection of MOPAC, and it's clear they have no locus in any way to inspect MOPAC. However, I think it is perfectly reasonable for you all to be asking, more than reasonable to be asking the question and to have the information as to, well, what has MOPAC done on these things? A lot of it should already be on, I will go back and check, a lot of it should already be on the website, because our oversight board minutes are on the website, so you will have had, and our performance reports are there, and there's a narrative around the quarterly performance reports. I will go back and think about how do we be, what should we be putting in the public domain in terms of the scrutiny and oversight that we have had over these issues, but also going forward, what scrutiny and oversight we will have. Because, and I don't know the answer to this in terms of the HMICFRS process in terms of PPOG. I'm going to the meeting next week, but I go with, the PCC and, the other 6 forces PCCs, other 5 forces PCCs also go to that process. So I will go back and think, because I think it is a very fair challenge and one in which we need to be transparent and open to Londoners about how this is being picked up, oversight that has happened as well as the oversight that will happen.
And Chair, as a matter for us, it's really a question for you at this moment. Can we, look, much that we need to... this is a wake-up call for the MPS MOPAC in some ways, and we share those concerns. We all want, and we know that you've been working hard in tackling crime, we all want to resolve these issues quickly and appropriately where we can. But we need to think as a PCC what the implications of this is about how we do our business and about how we monitor performance, whether it's of MOPAC and that the grey area of policing performance, which this committee we've grappled with, and I know you've shared that concern. So we need to think on our side, what does this mean for our future business and how we do it? And if we can pick that up in the future, because we're going to return to this subject, I'd be grateful.
Yes, we will, and we'll discuss that at length, no doubt.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Pigeon.
Thank you very much. I've been listening very carefully to the discussion this morning. But the Met effectively has been on notice since 2016, since the child safeguarding damning report that came out then. You've been effectively on notice on the bordering going into special measures since then. So, Deputy Mayor, as well as this being about serious failings in the Met, do you accept that you, the Mayor and MOPAC have been failing to ensure the quality police service that Londoners deserve? Do you take a bit of responsibility in your oversight? Perhaps there was more you could have done.
So you've, forgive me, but you are conflating a specific issue, a very large, important and really a priority issue around child protection. When you say on notice since 2016, that report was on child protection. So you've got to be really clear, it was a specific part of the Metropolitan Police. I have chaired a child protection improvement oversight group since then, and we've had these discussions many times here, whilst progress has been slow, there has been progress to the extent that HMICFRS at the last inspection told the Metropolitan Police and myself that they would no longer be doing I think it was I can't remember if it's quarterly or annual, but they'd be no longer doing such a regular drumbeat of inspections, and it would go into the Peel inspection. This is the Peel inspection that this engaged process has been kicked off on. But as Louisa Rolfe says, and I haven't yet seen the full report, so there may well be things and more things about child protection within that, and clearly I'll be looking for that. But the specific issue around child protection is on online images of abuse.
Yeah. But that's not what my question is. That's not my question. But my question was saying that because of that report was so damning, it could have been about any topic. Well, you were effectively on notice. My understanding is that because of that, you have been bordering being on notice whether the Met would go into special measures or not. Now, we can argue about the detail of that, but I want to understand whether you, as Deputy Mayor Oversight, take any responsibility for failing to hold to account the Met Police to improve the services they're delivering for Londoners.
So on the issue of child protection, which is the one that you started off on 2016...
No. My question was about serious failings in the Met.
Yeah.
You're picking what you want to
I'm
answer
not.
today. Yes, you are.
I'm genuinely not. You started off saying the Metropolitan Police has been on notice since 2016. The issue in 2016 that you have picked on and focused on is child protection. And I'm answering your question on that. I will come on to the rest of the Metropolitan Police. Specifically on child protection, that report was published in 2016, as we all know. We have had many discussions here in relation to the oversight that and the work that has happened since 2016, to the extent that last time the HMICFRS specifically looked at child protection, they came off that on notice and into the normal Peel inspection. Now, I haven't seen, as I've said, the draft report, so I don't know what else it says about child protection. What I do know from the letter is it picks up on online child abuse. I'm not excusing it in terms of the backlog and the numbers, but there is an issue about demand and capacity within the Met, and that is also picked up, that actually the number of online child abuse images that are being referred into the Met and referred nationally, this is a national issue around online child images, as just the volume, and it is shocking, the volume, absolutely shocking when you think about what it is about. It is very hard to meet the demand, but the Met, as Louisa Rolfe has said, has been bringing down the backlog around that. When you say the Met as a force has been on notice since 2016, I would I beg to differ on that. The Peel inspection in 2018-2019, the last Peel inspection, put the Metropolitan Police in the good category. So from that, we have looked, in terms of prioritising our oversight, we have looked about what else, what was in that required improvement. We've had discussions here about the vetting process. That was one of the issues in 2018-19, I might be getting my years slightly mixed up, that was picked up from HMICFRS, that vetting was not good enough and needed to improve, and the actual, getting through the vetting, never mind the quality, which is a different issue and, different area of focus now. And that has improved, and the backlog came down. That was specifically out of that HMIC, the Peel inspection from 2018-2019. And there are a number of issues that were brought forward. Now, during COVID, there weren't those inspections. The HMICFRS has come back in and has picked up, and that's where the engage process has come from. That's why I beg to differ in terms of the Metropolitan Police has been on notice as a force on going into engage. It was on, I agree, it was on notice around child protection and was taken off notice through the efforts of oversight, but also through the efforts of the Metropolitan Police.
Let's pause what you've just said, and let's just go, if I just shorten the question, do you accept that you, the Mayor and MOPAC, have failed to ensure the delivery of the quality police service that Londoners deserve?
Look, the Metropolitan Police is engaged, so Londoners aren't getting the service that they deserve. Our oversight has been picking up those issues. We have picked up the issues that are in the HMICFRS report, well, in the letter that we have got. We have picked those up. If we hadn't picked those up, as I've already said to the Chair, there would be a problem with our oversight, but we have. And that is why I feel that the engage process, I welcome it because we get the extra support and scrutiny. I genuinely welcome it. If we had not picked up those issues, if the Mayor and myself had not been very clear about the changes that needed to happen within the Met, I would think that we would have to think very carefully and scrutinise what we had been doing. But we had. So we knew what was happening. We were taking actions. HMICFRS have come in. They have found, putting it all together, that actually the process should be that the Metropolitan Police as a force goes into engage. Okay, let's move on then. In response to the latest report, the Mayor said, as I have been saying for some time, Londoners deserve better. And I have long been clear, wide-ranging reforms are urgently needed, and so on. July last year, less than a year ago, the Mayor publicly claimed, and let me quote, "I say loudly and clearly the police have my full confidence and full support." But clearly, you've said for some time you've been identifying these problems that we've just said several times to us, and some of these things are deep-rooted and long-running. So why has the Mayor so suddenly changed his view? So there is no sudden change. I don't think the two things that you've cited are incompatible. The Metropolitan, as has been said by Louisa, Rolfe, and also I think is clear from my discussion with the inspector, but also I think it's clear from I infer from the letter, is that it is a cumulative impact of what has happened, the performance issues that we have picked up, cumulative impact also of the high profile, and that is in the letter, of the high profile cases. So that, things have been mounting, there has been a steady mounting of issues. So I don't think what you're talking about, putting those two issues together are incompatible. What has happened is the Mayor has been clear. He has had confidence in the Metropolitan Police, and I've cited, and we should be clear about it. The Met has done very well on tackling violence. It really has. Priority issue, quite rightly a priority issue, not just for the Mayor and the MPS, but for Londoners. But the cumulative impact of what has happened, the performance issues, the Operation Houghton, the murder of Sarah Everard, has meant that the Met has gone over the line and into engage. And underneath, and in terms of the discussions that we've been having with the Met and the oversight that we have been having with the Met, we haven't been sitting there saying we have full, it's all fine. How we have been really clear where the issues are. one of the other issues in the letter has been on RUI and bail. We've had discussions here at the Police and Crime Committee on RUI and bail. We have had progress in terms of the management of RUI and the decreasing the number of times that RUI is used, particularly in domestic abuse cases. But clearly it hasn't gone far enough, and that's why the Metropolitan Police has been put in to engage.
It's been very noticeable, though, from this side of the table and just listening to the narrative that almost was a switch, and the Mayor's tone very much changed, and yours to some extent at some point. But let's park that there. I've heard your answer. You've mentioned twice now, you've got this special board or meeting. I don't know if the meeting next week is going to be this new kind of board or something that will meet 2 to 3 times a year to review the Met's progress in implementing improvements. Is that right? You said there's a meeting next week.
It's not that is the meeting that we are invited to by HMICFRS. It's called PPOG, Police Performance Oversight Group, chaired by Andy Cook, the Chief Inspector, and it's a standing board that any force in Engage is invited to.
That's the one
It's not a new board from
No. But that's what I was thinking. Yeah. Okay, so I called it a special board, PPOG, whatever it's called. Let's not call it that. That sounds terrible. But there is a meeting that will happen 2 to 3 times a year. Is that your understanding of it?
I believe it's quarterly.
Quarterly. Okay. And who will be attending that? Is that the one that I understand the Minister for Policing might attend? Somebody from the National Police Chiefs Council? Who will be going from MOPAC and the Mayor's office?
So I will be going to that next week with the Acting Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Sir Stephen House.
Will the Mayor of London be attending?
That's to be determined.
Okay, my understanding is for other forces, the actual Police and Crime Commissioner, not the Deputy, attends. So one would have thought, given this is the first time the Met has been placed in special measures, that the Mayor would want to attend.
As it stands, I mean, I'm not saying as it stands, it's to be determined whether he will attend. I will definitely be attending. It is actually that was what I think has been the inference from the HMICFRS. However, that's to be determined. It's not our meeting.
Yeah. Okay, I understand. One of the reasons behind the decision for the Met to be placed in special measures was its failure to record, I think it was 69,000 crimes. And I've read that the former Met Commissioner, Lord Stevens, suggested the figures could actually have been massaged by the Met. Do you agree this is a possibility, and are you reviewing this as a result?
So the figures that are in the letter that we've received from HMICFRS are the 69,000 ASB incidents that were not then transferred into being recorded crimes. So no, I don't agree with the inference in terms of the article that was in the Times that the whole of the Metropolitan Police crime recording is being massaged. No, I don't. We've had previously, and of course we need to have a look. I'm sorry, we keep saying this. We need to look at the report because that's where the detail is. I mean, that's that's not trying to avoid the issue.
I understand.
But from the previous specific inspection on crime data integrity, the Metropolitan Police was put in good. Now, clearly, something has happened around ASB. Now, I have looked, if you take violent crime, which was also one of the inferences around perhaps there's an issue with recording there. If you take violent crime, I have looked at the A&E data, which absolutely accords with the fall in violent crime. There's no, in terms of that decrease in the trend, when you look at the A&E data, which is one of the things that we've often said actually gives you a truer picture of what's happening rather than the reported incidences, there is that trend and that decline.
But will you be doing, once you get this detailed report, which of course we all would like to see, will you be doing some dip sampling, some analysis to assure yourself that this isn't more widespread in terms of data?
We will have to make sure that once we've got the detailed report, we'll have to take specific actions. We haven't yet decided which of those actions, we haven't, it's early days, but of course, if the detailed report has anything wider than ASB, we would have to have a look at that. But also, in terms of ASB, yes, it has previously been the locus of the Inspectorate to be looking at this. So again, it's that discussion at the meeting next week with HMIC to understand exactly who does what. But clearly, there needs to be good oversight across all the areas that have particular issues.
Okay. And I think it'd be interesting for us to be able to, once you've got this report, to look at how you're going to measure progress, the metrics you're using, and within the Met as well, to help us develop our own. So I think that would be really helpful going forward.
Yes, absolutely. But what I am very keen to do is make sure that we're not duplicating and running parallel actions and parallel tracking to the ones that HMICFRS will do through the Police Improvement Group. So we've got to look at how do we do this, but how do we make sure that we don't set off a whole plethora of activities and oversight, that actually you spend more time doing that than actually delivering the actions that will make the improvements.
But transparency around all of that will help us.
No, I agree.
We have a role to play.
I agree with that. I'm not at all
I know.
away from
I understand what you're saying as well. And finally, for the Assistant Commissioner, you've said lots of things like the Met's not complacent, but when you talked about it at the start, you talked about events and challenges. You didn't talk about the culture in the Met, which is at the heart of a lot of this. And it does feel, as Assemblymember Duval has said, that the Met is in denial. It felt like that when the Morgan report came out, the performance before our committee, and subsequently, I found it really shocking, actually. And then ultimately your response. What are you going to do to change that culture and that attitude? Because yes, of course, it's difficult to receive criticism. I can tell you, in politics, we get an awful lot of that. You know, that goes with the day job. But how do you ensure that actually you're always striving for the best rather than just tolerating quite low standards?
Thank you for your question, and I hope I haven't given you the impression that in not mentioning culture that it is not a fundamental issue for us. I know you've heard before about the work that we're doing with Baroness Casey, who is taking a fundamental root and branch look at culture in the Met. I think we take incredibly seriously the report from HMIC and the letter, and we await their report to look at our actions. But of course, you know, anything in there that alludes to, as you describe, a complacency, a defensiveness, must be addressed. And we must be really clear about the requirement to improve, but also to understand whether, you know, one of the key things we will absolutely be looking at when we look at all of these, and when I describe challenges and issues, you know, we want to understand whether culture is a driver of those issues. We must understand that, and we take incredibly seriously the feedback we've had so far. I'm sorry if it sounded like the response was at all, you know, ignorant of that. It's very much not. It is a clear part of our response, and we must understand. And there is a balance between ensuring that, and I think Tom Windsor set this out very clearly in his State of Policing report, that, you know, there are many people who work incredibly hard in policing every day who want to do the right thing, to safeguard the vulnerable, to respond effectively, secure justice for victims. There are some strengths in our culture, but we absolutely must ensure that, and, you know, one of the things that a really good example of our work around culture and understanding what might be at the heart of it is the work that we're doing around our response to rape. And the work we've done through Operation Soteria with academics who've looked in detail at thousands of incidents. They have spoken to more than 1,400 of our dedicated investigators and our SOIT officers who support victims every day, and they've given us some very clear feedback. It's a consistent issue nationally as well, that the overwhelming caseloads that officers deal with has an impact on them. It has an impact in a way that might desensitise them to the issues they're dealing with. And we're thinking very hard, working with the National Lead for Rape and Sexual Offences, with the College of Policing, the wider MPCC and Maggie Blythe's team to ensure that we can address that. I know colleagues at MPCC have been talking an awful lot as well about the fact that, you know, what's changed in policing nationally and our workforce and their exposure to trauma. You know, a significant proportion of our workforce are exposed to trauma. I think it's something like 35% of policing workforce nationally exposed to significant trauma every year. And if that is a repeated thing, then that has an impact on people and it might desensitise them. And we know those things can reduce empathy It's really important we address that. It's absolutely important as well that if our people, you know, some of the things I've talked about us wanting to understand in questions here around how we respond to calls, we've got to understand how the impact of, you know, increasing demand. We don't want our people to revert to an approach that doesn't have victims or our communities at the heart of what we do. I think, you know, a lot of, if we take a step back from these cumulative issues, I think there's a significant consensus across the Met that a lot of our answers are about building stronger, trusting relationships with the communities we serve, but increasingly open to feedback and more scrutiny of the action we take, more openness. No, I'm not suggesting we don't have that openness and scrutiny at the moment, but more to build greater trust, because actually that increasing openness, we know, you know, one of the best ways to address culture is for our people repeatedly to be, you know, talking with communities and also thinking about the impact of COVID and the pandemic. You know, for a large proportion of our workforce, for nearly 18 months, 2 years, their interactions with the public were limited to victims of crime, offenders, or people protesting about COVID restrictions. Actually, you know, we've worked incredibly hard as restrictions have been lifted to really ensure our officers are out there daily interacting with communities when it's not always a pressurised situation. Because that's, you know, building policing is about personal relationships and communication with the public. And our people often do that incredibly well. And, you know, ensuring that whilst there is a need to be very introspective about what we might have got wrong, we can't be a closed shop. We have to be very open in our approach to getting this right and addressing culture and the challenge. And when I say challenges, I mean that in a very broad sense. And culture, policing culture is of course something that has many strengths of, you know, teamwork ethos, incredibly hardworking, wanting to secure justice and fairness. But of course we've got to be alive to the downsides of that as well, of, you know, when criticised, we can't be defensive. We've got to be open. We've got to recognise that others might do things better and be open to that feedback.
I think it's understanding what does good look like for every level of your service, and I don't think you're there yet. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Colleagues, this section is running very over, and I'm happy for it too. It is far more important than anything else we're discussing, so I'll adjust other parts of the agenda when we've come to the end of this discussion. Assembly Member Garrett.
Hello. I'd like to ask the Deputy Mayor, if I may, around the process around the Mayor's actions in ending the previous Commissioner's tenure, and putting aside whether that was the correct thing to do. I wonder whether you recognise the way that he went about it, the actions that he took, whether you recognise the damage that did to relations, I think, between the Met and the Mayor's office, and what you're doing to repair that.
I'm not sure I'm going to, well, I'm not going to give you a running commentary in terms of the process. I think it's been very clear, and we had very clear conversations, as the Mayor and myself did, with the previous Commissioner as to what the problem was, and we've discussed this at Police and Crime Committee in terms of why the Mayor lost confidence in her plan to put, you know, to improve the trust and confidence of Londoners, that there was not enough around cultural change, but also around the engagement with Londoners in terms of that. Clearly, it did have a very, it did have an impact on the Metropolitan Police. Of course, it did. Any organisation that loses their leader will have an impact on it. I have been, in terms of moving on from that moment and moving on and ensuring that we have good relations with the Metropolitan Police. I genuinely think that has happened. I have chaired oversight boards. I still have my regular bilats, and the officers of MOPAC still have their regular meetings with the Metropolitan Police. And that's not just about oversight. That is also about all the other areas of the MOPAC Metropolitan Police interaction. So, for example, the Chief Executive of MOPAC chairs a regular meeting on to look at how do we decrease the number of teenage homicides, the number of children and young people in London who have been murdered. that is attended by all partners, including the Metropolitan Police, and the work of that partnership work has continued throughout this process. There has been no fracturing of that relationship in terms of the delivery of the services to London.
You must have heard some of the comments from, including in this chamber, from the acting commissioner and a number of others elsewhere in the media, about the abrupt way that was done, the abrupt way the mayor acted. You don't recognise that those actions did damage that relationship?
As I said, any organisation that loses their leader will have an impact on that organisation.
They didn't lose their leader, like down the back of the sofa or something.
The
previous commissioner
resigned.
By the actions of the mayor.
The previous commissioner resigned because the mayor made it clear that he no longer had confidence in her. And we discussed that, and of course, you know, myself and the acting commissioner were here at Police and Crime Committee, and that was a very difficult meeting. And yes, of course, you know, however, the relationship between ourselves and the Metropolitan Police is a good working relationship, and will continue to do that, because actually we have the same priorities and we have the same vision for London, and that is, one, to deliver the police and crime plan around the priorities of the mayor, and to make London safer. There is no fracture there at all, and we are working very closely, not just in terms of oversight and scrutiny, but also in terms of some of the services that we deliver together. Like, for example, we've talked about stalking previously. The Stalking Assessment Centre, there's a lot of delivery.
I know you want to talk about other things. I suppose the perception, the way that it looks often from where we sit here, and I think where the public see it, is that we heard the allegations this morning repeated again that the police don't hear criticism, don't respond to criticism, and are, say, arrogant in their response. And my judgment is this morning, in actual fact, Assistant Commissioner Rolfe has been quite humble in her response, in acknowledging. Now, we'll see whether the talk turns into action, but I think that the tone in this meeting has been quite positive. Whereas I just don't, the Mayor's office never seems to accept that anything is wrong, or that you've done anything wrong, or that anything is your responsibility. I mean, do you understand why you create that perception?
I'm not sure there's a really specific question in that. A different question from the one that I have already answered.
Do you understand why, when we sit here, you give the impression that you've done nothing wrong?
No, what I have sought to do is to ensure that you are aware, in answer to your questions, your basic questions are, didn't you know that these things were going wrong within the Met? What have you been doing on oversight? And I have sought to answer those.
Those were other people's questions.
But you've just talked, this is a little unfair, isn't it? Because you've just talked about my answer to my questions have given the impression what I have answered in the questions that I have been asked is what has happened, why has MOPAC not known this has been going on in the Met? My answer to that has been, we were aware of nearly all the issues that are in the letter from HMICFRS. We have had significant oversight on many of them, so we were aware. That is why, you know, those are my answers. It isn't in any way to try to shirk the duties and responsibilities of MOPAC. What I've tried to outline is how we have actually delivered those. Have they had the impact? You know, has it made the changes and all the changes that we would have wanted to make? Clearly it hasn't, because we are in the engage process. So I'm clear about that, and that is why I welcome the support that HMICFRS, the College of Policing and others, well, yet to be determined, can bring, so that we can actually deliver changes more quickly for Londoners.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Devonish.
I have two very quick questions. Firstly for the Deputy Mayor, and then one of them for the Assistant Commissioner, please. Did you, Deputy Mayor, see Sir Hugh Ord's comments last week?
I'm afraid I didn't, or I can't remember what they were, so I'm sure you've got them there in front of you.
I'll remind you, thank you. He was talking more about, quite an interesting point actually, about organisational design of the Met. And what he was basically saying is, in his view, it's become, I quote, too big and too complex. And he's recommending you bring it back to what it was 20 years ago, when it was apparently 5 areas, to quote Sir Hugh. Do you have any comment on that? And just simply, it's got too many moving parts, and perhaps a simplified structure would make it easier for everybody to do their job.
I'm not entirely sure what structure he would have had in mind. If you are I think one of the major issues, and we've not talked about it today, but is a context. It's not an excuse, but it is the context. It's not, for me, the issue around structure of the Metropolitan Police. You can that can go in various ways. That can go in terms of the actual structure internally, as the way that it's organised in terms of OCUs and the basic command units, and clearly there has been a reorganisation of that. Or, and I'm not sure what Sue Hugh Ward was talking about here, it could also be about the overall responsibilities and duties of the Metropolitan Police. I don't think there is an issue. I do not think it would be appropriate or right to be, for example, hiving off the counter-terrorism functions of the Metropolitan Police. A really significant review of policing nationally had looked at this alongside lots of other issues. The Police Foundation review, his strategic review of policing, and they were really clear, and they made it really clear in the report. And they actually said, to be clear, we do not think that there should be a change in the structure of the Metropolitan Police, because actually many of the responsibilities that are, often talked about being taken away from the Met are those that are working extremely well. And the strategic review of policing makes it very clear. Why would you start to dismantle it and try to change it when it's a part of the Metropolitan Police that is working well? I would say, and Claire Waxman was on the Today programme talking about this, I would say there is, and these are discussions that we're having with Louisa at the moment, there is a very good case around victim care and victim support, and we are exploring this within MOPAC. It was a manifesto commitment of Sadiq's to explore this in setting up a victims care hub, because actually one of the issues, and we've talked about this already, in the letter from HMICFRS is the Met's not reaching sufficient standards in relation to victim care. We have been as I've discussed already, picking up on this, and one of the proposals and what we are, exploring at the moment is how do you set up an independent victims care hub that will ensure that support, the information that is not consistently given to victims across the Metropolitan Police, is provided. And I think, we support, Claire Waxman, the Independent Victims Commissioner, has been calling for this. It was in the manifesto of Sadiq, and we are really actively exploring that at the moment.
Okay, so no organisational change from your point of view. Assistant Commissioner, what do you think of Sir Hugh's comments?
So I don't recall Sir Hugh's comments specifically, but I've seen a number of media commentaries from ex-commissioners and others with an opinion on this. I think a few thoughts spring to mind for me. So one, I had in mind the Policing Foundation strategic review of policing that the Deputy Mayor's mentioned, but also Lord Toby Harris's review of counter-terrorism, because I think a number of those comments were about a separation and the sort of very considered response about recommending against that. I think other thought I would immediately have is that if you're going to, of course, a new commissioner may wish to reconfigure structures within the Met, but any reconfiguration of structures, we must ensure that would, one, provide the environment that would enable the improvements we're talking about and not actively interfere with that. Because, my 30 plus years in policing now, my experience is that often we might leap to a structural solution to a problem when the problem may be much, maybe much more complex than structures, and maybe, and certainly from the HMICFRS letter, some of the feedback is about supervision and leadership, capacity and capability and infrastructure. We must ensure that we can effectively address those things. Structures may be part of the solution, but I think it's something, if you're going to do it, you've got to consider it incredibly carefully and to be very confident that it's something that would make the difference. And I wouldn't leap into a structural solution if it is not a structural problem. But we, of course, everything is on the table here, and we want to understand how we can effectively address the issues.
And very briefly, for the Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner for London, I thought your response to A.M. Garrett's comment about accountability, do you really think we need a Police and Crime Commissioner in London when basically the Met or the Home Office seem to pretty much have to do everything?
I don't think that's a really very serious question, is it, in terms of the Home Office doing everything. Of course, I think the democratic accountability is very important. And one of the, because Sadiq has been mayor, there has been a significant difference in terms of policing in London, not least actually the additional resources that the mayor has been able to put in far before the Home Office and the government changed their minds about austerity. There's 1,300 additional police officers in London because the Mayor of London, as Police and Crime Commissioner, switched, as we all know, business rates into the Metropolitan Police. What the Home Office has done for the Metropolitan Police and for policing nationally is cut. It was only recently that they've reversed this, and we're nationally getting 20,000 officers. In no way, it's only just about getting to 2010 levels. So I would say, actually, the Home Office has been a detrimental impact on the Metropolitan Police, and the Mayor of London has actually led the way and driven some of the changes, and we will continue to have oversight on changes, but has actually put considerable additional resource into the Metropolitan Police, as well as convened and stood up the partnerships that the Metropolitan Police needs, for example, to tackle violence, set up the Violence Reduction Unit, which led the way nationally.
I was hoping the Deputy Mayor would talk about accountability and partly her and Mr Khan's responsibility, but clearly I'm wasting my time. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now go to Assembly Member Dr Sahota.
Thank you, Chair. This is a question for the Deputy Mayor. You spoke about that you weren't surprised but disappointed about what happened. Therefore, you knew something was going wrong and you picked it up. Were you monitoring the progress that the Metropolitan Police were making in response to your concerns?
Of course, we have been monitoring progress. I have regular bilats, quarterly oversight board, and we also publicly publish the quarterly performance report, which comes to Police and Crime Committee as part of, and it's public anyway, but comes to the Police and Crime Committee. So yes, of course, we're able to track. We track progress.
And so progress was being made.
In some areas there has been progress, and I don't know whether we'll get time to get onto for example, as I said earlier, the telephone digital investigation unit, where because of the victim satisfaction surveys that we publish and we, as part of our oversight mechanisms, we know what was happening, and we could pinpoint that there's a specific significant issue within the TDIU. Worked in partnership with the Metropolitan Police. They implemented a pilot around callbacks for specific victims. I think was it vehicle crime? Yeah, vehicle crime, and that has improved victim satisfaction. It is now embedded within the TDIU, and I understand that the Met are going to roll it, increase the number of crimes that will be pertinent for. So that's an example of where oversight, tracking of progress has had an impact and a significant difference.
So, and I'm bringing my question from the background of the health service. Was there a point when you realised that the other thing you said, you welcome the involvement of the Inspectorate, right? So you are hoping they can do something to the Metropolitan Police, bring about a change process, which you, as MOPAC, couldn't do that. Have I understood that right?
So I welcome the Inspectorate. The Inspectorate has always been part of the evidence and the evidence that we use for oversight of the Metropolitan Police, as it is for all police and crime commissioners. It's a bit of a crowded field, isn't it?
Let me get to that question. Could you have called in the Inspectorate sooner than the regular inspection time, which had picked up these problems?
So there's always been a regular pattern of peel inspections. We had the last peel inspection pre-COVID. They stopped because of COVID, and the first one after COVID is this one. So we knew they were coming. We have called in the Inspectorate twice. We recently have called in the Inspectorate over I've requested the Inspectorate, and they have started, in particular, in looking at the deaths in custody, not deaths in custody, the response of the Metropolitan Police to unexpected deaths.
So this inspection,
yes, we have.
Was this inspection that took place, was it a planned one, or was it something which you had instigated yourself?
No, we didn't instigate it. It is the normal process of inspections of the peel inspections is an annual inspection. It didn't happen during COVID because of COVID. So it's been a really important inspection report for MOPAC and for the public to understand what is happening in real depth in terms of the way the Inspectorate. MOPAC isn't an Inspectorate.
Yeah, well, the example I'm coming from is that the CQC in the healthcare service regularly inspects hospitals and GP practices. It does it regularly. But when a hospital realizes that a particular team in the hospital isn't working effectively, they will bring some measures in to remedy the situation. When they fail to do that, or they fail that they are not making the progress they should be making, they will call in the CQC sooner, earlier, for measures. And the question I'm trying to say for the member of the public is, you knew that something was wrong there, you were monitoring it, progress wasn't being made. Did it ever occur to you that you should call in the Inspectorate in sooner than the regular inspection was due, as would happen in the healthcare service?
I'm not sure. Apologies, because I've clearly not been clear enough. The peel inspection was coming back. It didn't come back because of COVID, not because we didn't call it in, or the HMIC was, putting it out. And I don't mean, I'm genuinely not being critical. COVID stopped the regular peel inspections. As soon as they could, they have come back into the Metropolitan Police. However, I take the principle of your question is not just about peel, it is actually, what else should we have been doing? In terms of the culture of the Met and the really significant issues around that, the Mayor agreed and ensured that there was a review, a really significant review with Baroness Louise Casey to be undertaken in the Metropolitan Police. That is happening, a really, really robust review of the Metropolitan Police. It's an example of taking action. Another example, which I gave earlier, is knowing that the victim satisfaction and the rates around victim satisfaction were not good enough. We have worked with the Metropolitan Police, and there is a review happening around the witness care units. And Louisa Rolfe has talked about Operation Soteria. That has happened because of MOPAC, because of the deep dive of rape cases in 2019, and coming out of that, the work that MOPAC instigated and the work that MOPAC undertook, and that has gone national. Yeah. So we have taken specific steps in specific areas, but the peel is a regular inspection. We didn't need to call them in because they were coming.
And that's the point I'm making, right? That maybe we should have called them earlier, because the CQC does examine hospital regularly. When something is going wrong with the hospital, we say, we need your help. And that's the question. But anyway, we will keep coming back to this. But the other thing I just want to say generally, that I don't think when things go wrong anywhere, it isn't the fault of any one individual. It's a system failure. We need to look at the system that exists, right, to monitor this situation. So I think I'll leave it here at the chair at the moment.
So very good. Very good comments from my colleagues. I'm just going to go back to it because it is of concern. You've quite clearly pointed out that you knew there were issues. I know the MOPAC isn't an inspection body, but it is an oversight body of which you're in charge. If the oversight body was picking up issues, because I know there's 180 of them, not all of them are looking at this specifically, but you've got a lot of staff in MOPAC. If you're noticing the problems, as you say you have been for quite some time, and I quote you there, did you have conversations with the Mayor about your concerns?
I have regular conversations, discussions with the Mayor about what is happening within the Metropolitan Police, and I do feel like we're going over ground. You've asked me these questions.
That's fine. If we're happy to go over ground,
we can go
then you
over the
have
ground
to.
again. In terms of the issues, and I have been very clear that some of the issues are new and have emerged since the last peel inspection, or since the last inspection around crime data integrity, where the Metropolitan Police was given a good. Some of them have been, since we've seen since 2019, for example, on the rape review and on the number of prosecutions. So that it's not just one timeline that since 2016 there have been all these issues, and then now peel, the Inspectorate has come in, and peel is, we're in engage. There is a number of different areas which, all taken together, we're now in engage. So I think in terms of, yes, of course, I've had discussions with the Mayor. That is why he has been clear in terms of what is needed. That is why in terms of, he instigated the Louise Casey review, because we're very clear that there was a significant problem, significant issues around culture. That review is ongoing and will be very robust. And so, of course, those discussions have happened, and of course, I have those discussions with the Mayor and the mayoral directors in terms of performance on a quarterly basis, because we do those quarterly reports which weren't there before.
Okay, so you were very concerned for quite some time. You've discussed it with the Mayor, we've established that. So did you go back with all of those concerns to the Commissioner?
I have had regular meetings with Commissioner, Assistant Commissioners, MOPAC officials have had regular meetings with various boards and various meetings within the Metropolitan Police. The issues that we have been concerned about, some of them are newer than others. Victim satisfaction and trust and confidence has been ongoing for a while. Emergency response, we have looked at that regularly. The last an oversight board I chaired in January, I picked up on the issues of emergency response because I could see that they were not meeting not just the national standards, but actually in terms of the Londoners weren't getting the emergency response that they needed.
Okay, so if you discussed these worries constantly with the Commissioner, which you've just indicated you did you give her timelines by which you wanted certain things, certain indicators to improve? How, just discussing it with her, did you set targets that you thought needed to be met in order to protect the public, if you like? What did you say to her? We're concerned about X, Y, Z. How are you going to fix that? Is that the sort of conversation you had?
So if we take... So it is though that type of conversation does happen, of course it does, but it is not for me to set those timelines. Actually, my questions to the Metropolitan Police has always been, what is your timeline? How do you assure yourself on performance? And how do you, what do you do to intervene when a performance is not good enough? So on emergency response, my questions to Steve House and the Commissioner on that was, what point, how are you going to intervene in this? Do you think this is good enough? And to ask for actions to be taken. We are always, we've had many discussions here and many discussions with the Metropolitan Police about that line of accountability and oversight and management.
Yes,
my role is around accountability and oversight. It isn't the management of the Metropolitan Police, and that's not an insignificant. That is an important distinction to be made, and also an important distinction to be made in relation to operational policing. The line of accountability goes to the Commissioner, who then has operational, and the management board.
Yes,
operational
we all
control.
Understand that, Sophie.
But that operational control is around the performance as well.
What the public needs is confidence that if people that are supposed to be overviewing what's going on, and with a staff of 180, a deputy mayor for policing and a police and crime commissioner in the mayor, you would hope that the people that are watching what's going on will actually be able to bring it to the attention to the person that is in control, i.e. the commissioner. Now, you have already said that your worries have gone back a very long time. None of this then works through if you were pointing these things out to the Commissioner and nothing was happening or various things were still going wrong. Why did you exclaim that you were quite happy? In actual fact, it was confirmed in the Houses of Parliament that Sadiq Khan, the Police and Crime Commissioner, wanted Cressida Dick to carry on as the Commissioner. What assurances did she give him that were suddenly out of place? Assemblymember Pigeon has put it absolutely perfectly. It was like a switch was turned off. He'd gone from having every faith in her to suddenly not. And it does appear that when the media turns, that's what then changed his mind. Policing is far too important to go on a whim of the media. You are repeating questions that I have answered, not repeating once, you're repeating the same question over and over again. We've got I thought you wanted to get on to other issues. I absolutely accept that this is a very important question, but you are asking the same question Deputy
over and over
Mayor,
again.
if we sit here until you walk out early, until we sit here asking you the same questions, if this is what this panel wants, this is what we'll do. We're trying to establish why you were absolutely up for the Commissioner. Please let me finish.
I'm sorry. I do think that continuing to ask me the same question, which I will give you the same answer to, I really genuinely, we are going over the same ground. I have answered these questions.
As a Deputy Mayor, we are looking for answers that will give the public confidence that they've got people overseeing what the police are doing without having to have an inspection in place that will keep things as we would want them to be going forward. It is a great pity that it has taken an inspection to come in to actually point out numerous things are going wrong. Since you don't want to carry on answering questions,
you know that
we will move on.
But Chair, you know that is not what has happened, that the Inspectorate has come in and revealed issues that we were not aware of. You know that because you've asked me questions about some of the areas that are in the Inspectorate,
about all
and I've answered them.
Yes, and I say to you, if you knew about all these things going wrong, why were you absolutely supporting the Commissioner to stay in place only months before the Mayor put her under notice?
And
I'm
as
going
I
to
have
finish
answered,
this here,
none of
but I
these-
will warn you now, we will be coming back to this, and you will answer the questions that we put before you.
And I
Colleagues, I will go on now to the second item, which is strip search of children. We'll start with Assembly Member Ahmed.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, panel. Strip searches carried out on children are an intrusive practice. 5,279 cases were carried out between 2019 and 2021. The Met have suggested that this practice is only being used when absolutely necessary and that it is carried out with respect and respect, dignity, empathy, and is effective. Is that the case, and are they being used too often? So, Assistant Commissioner, if you'd like to start, please.
Thank you. I agree that strip search is an incredibly intrusive process, and I think the debate about this reflects some of the dilemmas that officers face. In that, faced with suspicion that somebody may be a significant risk to themselves or others, that they may be concealing a weapon, or that they may seek to harm themselves, often officers have to make very difficult decisions, but also we must be absolutely cognizant of the impact, the traumatic impact of a search, and we must be satisfied that we are recognising children as children, and our approach must be informed, and we must have the right scrutiny around that approach. So Laurence Taylor, Deputy Assistant Commissioner, has been leading a group looking in great detail at this work to satisfy ourselves around the appropriateness of those searches. And when I was last here, we talked about Child Q and our huge sadness, regret and concern about that particular case. And I think, we are very concerned, and we absolutely want to get this right and be satisfied that where officers are in a position facing difficult decisions and making these decisions, that one, there is the right support, training, scrutiny and oversight, and that our understanding of the impact, and that children are at the heart of this. So if I may, I would invite Laurence to talk about the work that he's been doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, a couple of distinctions, if I could, just to start with. So, you've got two types of strip search. You've got a MTIP, which is a more thorough intimate parts search, which is conducted prior to arrest. The figure you quoted is in custody strip searches, which are done for evidential purposes or to safeguard the individual. And I support Louisa. We do too many in custody strip searches, no question. And it's absolutely essential, as Louisa has said, that the child is at the forefront of what we do. And it's one of the reasons that we are saying it would be wrong to remove this as a tactic, because we genuinely believe that children would be exploited. They would be used to mule drugs and other weapons, because there's no chance of them being found potentially. But we have got to get our rationale and the proportionality of those searches right. So we are really committed to that. We've put in a significant amount of work to understand what the issues are. There are a number of process issues, such as appropriate adults not being present, which is wrong. It's against the policy, and that needs to stop. But we've put in a number of safeguards. So from the 1st of April, we are now checking every single MTIP search that a child is subjected to. We are also now, as of 2 days ago, checking every single strip search of a child in custody to satisfy ourselves that the rationale was appropriate, that it was done in the appropriate way, and that it was necessary. And the very clear direction we have given is we do not expect those sorts of numbers to continue. So already this year with MTIP, we've seen a reduction. We're at about a third of where we've been in previous years. So those numbers have reduced. They're not stopping, which I think is appropriate. We've introduced inspectors' authorities, so you cannot do an MTIP search, and now you can't do a strip search in custody without the authority of an inspector. But alongside that, the safeguarding measures, ensuring that we complete a Merlin form, which is a child coming to notice form, on every single search that is conducted on a child, as well as those referrals to partners and independent scrutiny of these as well. And there are other things we're exploring. Clearly, we can't use body-worn video. That would be wholly inappropriate. But we are looking at audio recording so we can get independent scrutiny around where these searches are done. You'll have also seen, and it's been covered here previously with Child Q, some of the safeguarding report measures around adultification training and awareness for our staff of the impact on the child. We've introduced that adultification training to all our schools officers in Hackney. It's being rolled out across frontline policing in Hackney, and we're now looking at how we can replicate that across the Met more broadly, so that that as an issue, as well as those broader safeguarding issues, are really understood and the impact on the child is understood, and we can absolutely assure ourselves we're doing them for the right reason.
Thank you. If I could now focus on a little bit more of what you've said, and let's do a deep dive into that. I think there is an understanding that sometimes these intimate searches are necessary for the reasons that you've stated. However, you've also stated that safeguarding is paramount and has always been paramount. However, we have these cases, and I will refer to the other 8 that have now been referred to the IOPC. What went wrong? Why wasn't safeguarding paramount in those cases?
With the additional 8, so we made a decision that we will refer all of the complaints that we were currently reviewing in relation to either MTIP or strip search in custody to the IOPC. And we're waiting to hear back from them as to whether they will take those as independent investigations or not, because there is, as you can imagine, a spectrum of things that have gone wrong, from Child Q, where no appropriate adults were present, and the circumstances in which that search was conducted, to some others where the circumstances may have been appropriate, but we've referred it for transparency to ensure that our thinking is correct. But to answer your question specifically, I think there are a number of challenges. Some is around culture that we've talked about previously, where we have processes that we use and we stick to the process without sometimes considering the impact of that process. And that's a big piece of this work, to understand the impact of what we do and the effect it has on people, rather than just ticking boxes and following a process. We've had occasions where appropriate adults haven't been present. Again, sometimes there are legitimate reasons why an appropriate adult isn't present, and it's a challenging area because, I'll give an example, if we were to strip search a 16-year-old girl and the appropriate adult was her stepfather, she may well not want that appropriate adult there. We've set some very clear direction that in those situations we should seek an alternative appropriate adult. And again, those searches, unless there is an immediate risk to safety, they will not take place without that appropriate adult being present. So it's a combination of issues. There's no one single thing. I think there is a large part around the demand and the volume of policing in London that has affected the way we're using these processes that we are determined to change. And I think there are some process bits that we've just not complied with, and that is really easy to fix.
Are you clear that, and I'm looking at monitoring and evidence for this, that there is a clear understanding across the Met of how strip searches of children should be carried out?
We have put an awful lot of effort into reviewing and informing officers of what the expectations are, both from that impact perspective and the policy they should follow. We've introduced videos, we've redone training, we've introduced a 10-point checklist for when MTIP searches should take place, and it's on the stop search forms, so they have it with them. We're having those conversations with our staff. To answer your question, am I confident that absolutely everybody in the Met gets it? No, which is why the numbers are higher than we would expect them to be. And that is why we're putting these measures in place to address that, to bring those down, because we do recognise that impact. Where it's appropriate, we must and should do it, and we should do it properly, and where it isn't, we need to stop and understand the reasons why that child may be where they are.
Assistant Commissioner, the last time you appeared before the committee, and you've just referred to this, you told us that the Met takes the adultification of black children very seriously. Can you tell us how this is now being actioned, and how particularly about the adultification of black children that officers are being made aware of this?
Thank you. So the work that Laurence described in terms of working in Hackney, initially with our schools officers across the Met, but also all officers in Hackney, but looking to, we've been working with training for officers to ensure that they have training. Now, I'm not sure of the provider, but I think I'm aware. Laurence, you might be able to confirm for me, but we've been working with independent organisations who can provide that awareness and training to our officers to ensure that they have a greater understanding. We will evaluate the impact of that training and then look at rolling it out more widely across the Met. Also putting in place the checks and balances. So, for example, Met detention is part of Met operations, my bit of the Met. I am really clear as to the scrutiny I expect of any strip searches, particularly involving children, and working with the leadership team in Met detention to ensure that we have the right scrutiny in place, that we involve our independent custody visitors in that scrutiny. But also I know that Laurence has been looking at how we might, with the independent community-led scrutiny we already have for use of force and stop and search, how we might incorporate strip search within that scrutiny as well. But also, I know that Laurence has been meeting with a number of organisations from health and others to help us understand, the trauma and the impact of a search, but also to ensure that our officers, and I think, Laurence mentioned culture, and one of the tensions we've been working with our people is since the very sad death of Matt Ratana in one of our custody suites, our custody sergeants have become incredibly aware of the dangers they face at work and their colleagues face. And we need to ensure that that doesn't mean that they are tipping towards a more inclination to search, to reassure. We want to ensure the balance is right. And of course, where this is, and as I said, safeguarding children at the heart of this, because we are talking about children here, but in ensuring that where, of course, in some circumstances where we feel they may, present a danger to themselves or to others, that we are conducting searches appropriately, ethically, and that we have the right scrutiny.
Thank you. At this committee on the 26th of May this year, I asked the Acting Commissioner whether he was expecting any other child strip search referrals to be made to the IOPC. He said that he was aware of one, and sadly, since that meeting, 8 new cases, which we've just referred to, of child strip searches have actually been referred to the IOPC. As we said, between 2019 and 2021, of the 5,279 strip searches of children were made. 75% of those were of children from Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. Assistant Commissioner, what are the ethnicities of the children in the 8 new cases being investigated by the IOPC?
So I'm afraid I don't have that information to hand, but I'm very happy to write to you and provide that information. We have it.
If you could.
Of course.
Yeah,
and it's really important that our scrutiny does look at any issues of disproportionality. And I know that in the past, not in relation to this work and children, but I know in the past that we did with our strategic insight unit, so our analysts who look often at our issues and concerns in the Met, they'd conducted some work on strip search in custody, I think in 2020, 2021, where they looked at disproportionality. And what we identified was that there was not a disproportionate strip search occurrence within custody at that time, that when you looked at the drivers of search, it was more related to location of arrest or location of detention or arrest team appeared to be the driving factors influencing, and the subject you were arrested for, whether it was a weapon or drugs, as opposed to arrest for a theft. Now, of course, we have to look at this, and of course we've got to be cognizant, as I've mentioned in the past, of things like, you know, our awareness of adultification and ensuring that we are informed, we are aware, and that we have the right scrutiny and have the right data to monitor issues around proportionality of searches.
It's quite a high figure, isn't it, that out of 5,279 strip searches, that 75% of those were of children from black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. Why do you think that is? Why is that figure so high?
So I don't have an answer as to why, but I am incredibly concerned by it because, of course, as Laurence said, our sense is that we are conducting too many of these searches. We know from the actions we've put in place already, they are dropping significantly. We want to ensure that then when they're conducted appropriately. But any strip search, we know, has an impact. We know it has a traumatic impact. And sometimes that's it. And we must take that into account. And that traumatic impact for a young person, if that is their experience of policing and something that has a lasting impact, then it will have an impact on their trust and confidence in us. And we want to work with all our communities across London, but particularly those that we know might already have less trust. So this, of course, is of huge concern to us and something that we must be aware of and we must address.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Assembly Member Mayor, there's one question for the Deputy Mayor, and since the Deputy Mayor is leaving early, I'm just going to call Assembly Member Devonish to ask that, and we'll come straight back to you. Okay.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor, the Mayor's Transparency, Accountability and Trust in Policing Action Plan says it will produce a quarterly race equality audit reporting on the Met's use of its powers, including strip searches. When can we expect this data to be published, please?
The data is already published, should be already on the MOPAC website in terms of the disproportionality figures. The strip search data is, I'd have to check because there was issues around getting the strip search data up, but it should be if it's not up already, it should be shortly up. But a lot of the race equality statistics are already on the website for MOPAC. There was an issue in terms of the strip searching. It's taken longer than it should have to get that information and to be publishing it. And sorry, Chair, I was on my phone unusually because I don't like to be on my phone in the committee to see if I can stay a bit longer. I'm happy to stay a bit longer, but I do need to leave by 12:30 because I've got back-to-back, I've got this meeting about that we agreed with clerks. And
we didn't agree. You told us you were leaving early, so I had to accept that.
We gave a very good explanation, but I was on my phone to see if we could push it back, but I'm afraid I really do need to leave by 12:30 because if my day slips any further, at the end of the day, I'm not saying. At the end of the day, I have a family victims meeting, which I really don't want to be late for.
Well, we'll continue on then with Assembly Member Mahema. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. My questions are primarily to the Met, but obviously the Deputy Mayor may have some thoughts about some of this. So I think in the conversations around strip search, and I welcome the fact that the police, the Met have accepted adultification as an issue, particularly around black children. I continue to be concerned that we're not able to join those two things because there still is a bit of a reticence around accepting that race may have been a factor. In the case of Child Q, obviously subject to the IPC report being published, but that is a fundamental issue in addressing the trust and confidence. And that I don't think that needs kind of academic study. The numbers speak for themselves, as Assembly Member Ahmed has said. 75% of the children that you stop and search are black and minority ethnic, and I'm sure the numbers are very similar when we move on to questions about strip search. And so I just think that it's staring us in the face, and it probably has been staring people in the face for a long, long time, and I think we can't address those issues until we accept that as a whole. Because we do want black people, black Londoners want to be policed fairly and equitably, just the same as their white counterparts, and that does not happen. They're arrested rather than treated as victims of crime. But My questions are really around what the system you have in place to make sure that appropriate records of strip search are kept, so that so that senior officers can review them, considering the Deputy Mayor said that it was a struggle to get that data up. So if I could start with you, Louisa, and then Laurence.
Of course, thank you. So in terms of strip searches, other than the more thorough intimate part searches, so if we focus on strip searches in custody, any search in custody must be recorded in the custody record. Our custody suites are subject to CCTV recording, of course. A strip search would not take place under cameras, but we've talked about the audio recording to capture that. We are looking at how we audit to ensure that we are confident that, you know, there is nothing slipping beneath the radar here. And going back to your point on reticence, I hope we haven't come across as reticent to wanting to understand and address these very serious concerns you raise, because, you know, for us, our job is preventing crime fundamentally, and to do that, we know that at the heart of that is building a trusting relationship with the communities we serve. So we must do that, and hopefully you can help us with this through your scrutiny. If I may hand over to Laurence to talk about the work that he's been leading that is very focused on ensuring that, one, we have the effective supervision, leadership, but also scrutiny and audit of these occurrences. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'll be fairly brief. So Louisa has described the capture of the information through NSPIS, which is our custody recording system. All of those strip search on children are now effectively taken from that system and reviewed by a central team. And all of that data comes through my oversight group, so I'm cited on all of those and any discrepancies or concerns that we may have. Similarly with the MTIP searches, they're recorded on our CRIS system, our intelligence system, and they similarly are now reviewed since April. That goes through a monthly stop and search review that looks at MTIP but also stop and search more broadly, and results from that are also analysed through my oversight group. So in terms of that data scrutiny, there are a number of internal mechanisms that we're using to assure ourselves. We're also taking that data to some of our community monitoring groups and others, so we have more independent scrutiny around that. And we are looking at how we can build in additional groups. So as Louisa mentioned, myself and the Acting Commissioner met with a group, black female doctors the other day. Really positive meeting, some brilliant ideas from the medical world around how we might deal or address some of the challenges we have. So I'm looking to engage as broadly as we can.
Sorry, can I just... When you say challenges, what do you mean by challenges?
Well, the challenges that we've alluded to, we are doing too
but
many.
What are you alluding to?
So there are too many strip searches in custody, and there is disproportionality in those searches, and we need to understand why there is disproportionality.
But do you not? But do you not see that if? But it would be obvious to those doctors that came to see you why you have problems. I guess that's my point. We're just kind of circling around something, and it seems... So I'm not suggesting that you're not open to a conversation as an institution, as the Met, but I think a bit of clarity and focus about what it is that you are trying to address. I do not know these people that you met, but the issue is that 75% of the children that you strip search are black or ethnic minority. So how to fix that is the problem to be fixed, rather than kind of wider community engagement.
I totally agree. So absolutely, that is what we need to be addressing. And actually it's for all children, because it has the same impact on all children. But as you rightly point out, there is a much greater proportion of black and minority ethnic children who are subject to a strip search in custody. And MTIP, actually. MTIP appear to be far more focused. The kind of outcome rate on an MTIP search is around 61%, which is far higher than a normal stop search. In custody, that is much lower. And that is the issue as to why those decisions are being made. And I think there are a number of factors, some of which will be adultification, some of which will be safety concerns following Matt's murder, some of which will be ongoing cultural issues, and some will be process issues. And that is what we're working to try and understand and hear as many voices in that conversation. And it came up earlier around who else do we look to. I'm engaged with the College of Policing, I'm engaged with National Stop Search Lead, National Safety Safeguarding Leads, and the National Children and Young Person Lead to try and understand nationally, are the Met outliers here? Are there unique problems that we are facing? Where can we learn from? And how do we resolve the situations that I think we're all accepting exist and need to change?
Have you finished?
I'm happy for Assembly Member Duval's to come in. I've just got one other question.
No.
My questions are following on from you. So
Yeah. No. Carry on, please.
Okay, thank you. Sorry to interrupt you. So I had wanted to ask the IOPC when they came to see us a couple of weeks ago about their implementation, and I want to ask you the same, because that report hasn't, the Met has accepted the recommendations in full, but the final report hasn't been published. When you're going to be implementing the full recommendations of the City and Hackney Safeguarding Partnership, and what they are, what you're implementing.
Okay, so there were 14 recommendations. There were a number that were multi-agency recommendations, a number that were Met-specific, and some national recommendations. As I say, I'm engaged with the National Stop Search Lead and College to look at the national recommendations, because they're not wholly within our gift to change. All of the recommendations that were specific to the Met, we are implementing. We are doing those locally. It's important that Hackney and the local command teams are involved in that, but that oversight is seen through my board that I chair with that more holistic view. The adultification training has already begun. We've rolled that out to our schools officers. We have a further 120 places for our frontline officers in Hackney, and I'm looking at how we might procure that training and evaluate that training, because it is important that it does what we want it to do, to roll that out more broadly across the Met. And all of the other recommendations are either now in place or close to being in place. We've had some challenges around one, which was with a specific group locally to engage, but that is unlocking now as well. So I'm confident that we've accepted the recommendations, that we've worked hard to implement those recommendations, and we're taking that learning and spreading that more broadly across the Met.
So what lessons do you feel the Met has learned following the high-profile cases around strip search? I know when last time you were here, Louisa, you had committed to meeting some local young people's organisations, and obviously I've followed that up with them. But what I would say is that there is a lot of reticence among, it's desperately sad to see, among 15, 16-year-olds to meet with the police, because they are either very cynical of you and the way that they and all their peers have been treated, or they are just plain out scared of you, because they don't know what will happen to them, or they have seen things happen to them, to their friends. I feel like I'm struggling with this line of questioning, because I feel like there is a lesson that I really want you to learn, which I don't know what it is that you have learned from what has happened so far, and from that learning, what changes, meaningful changes, are going to come about.
So in terms of lesson learned, I think the primary lesson is the one that you allude to, in terms of the one experience of a young person with the Met, particularly a young black person, if their experience is traumatising, if it transpires that it was wholly wrong in terms of like child Q, then that has huge ramifications for us in terms of, and a large hill for us to climb to build trust with young people, and for us, for us to effectively ensure the safety of Londoners, to prevent crime, to secure justice for victims, we've got to build and focus on building strong, trusting relationships with our communities, and also with the wonderful charities and community groups who might often provide a voice for those who may struggle to articulate their concerns because they just generally don't trust us, too frightened of us, don't want to engage with us. So, you know, brilliant organisations like Sister Space and others who have come forward and said, we can help, you know, we're going to be really brutal about what we think is wrong, but we can help and we want to help, and we really welcome that. And I think involving organisations like that, but also young people in scrutiny of what we do, is a huge lesson for us. But that has got to be not just a short-lived lesson about Child Q, which is why I'm so pleased with the work that Laurence is doing to ensure that we take the learning from that and ensure that we do everything we can to ensure it doesn't happen again. That, of course.
If I could just add two things as well. I think on a very practical level, there's a number of issues we've identified, and it's come up earlier actually with the HMIC conversation around supervision. We need our supervisors to be intrusive, objective and supportive. We want to learn, we want to change, and that's really important, and we're building those mechanisms. I think we've learnt about risk and risk appetite, and do we understand risk in custody to the individual or us and our staff, but also balance that with the impact a strip search will have. So we're changing the conversation, changing the approach. We've learned that sometimes we can be too quick to react, and just taking a pause will give you time to make those considerations. We've discussed adultification. I have no doubt that training will assist with raising awareness for officers, changing some of their views, not all immediately, there is much more work to be done, but also some of the systemic issues here, because often the result or the impact of policing is as a result of much broader systemic issues that often we are unable to influence, and that goes across the multi-agency. And that's why the adultification training we're doing, which is multi-agency training, is so important, because we understand all of those different perspectives and where we can have the greatest impact within the system to try and prevent some of this happening.
Thank you for that. I mean, I think that is welcome that you're addressing and identifying adultification. I think the next conversation that we need to have in a measured, calm way is about race. In specific cases of Lambeth and Southwark constituency, North East constituency, but like you said, for the benefit of all Londoners, it's something that does need to be tackled head on, and it's really sad that we're sat here having that conversation, because the Met is huge and it has agency, and I want to have confidence that that will happen. But my question, next one really, is around how you engage with parents and carers when strip searches are undertaken on children. You mentioned that in 61% of cases there is additional action, but I don't know whether that's additional evidence. What does that lead to?
The 61% is when we look at the effectiveness of stop search, we look at the positive outcome rate, i.e. something is found, whether that's drugs, weapons or something else. So in stop search that's around 25 to 28%. For MTIP that's 61%, which would suggest we are more focused on the reasons for doing an MTIP, and bear in mind often they are done to prevent somebody from being arrested or ensuring that we have the appropriate evidence to arrest at that stage, whereas that's much lower in custody, and I think that's because of the safeguarding aspect that almost reduces the bar for doing that. And apologies, I forgot the second part of your question.
In parallel to the work that you're doing around adultification, to focus on and have the conversation about race specifically within the Met, because you do have agency, there's 44,000 of you.
And sorry, I think the other part was around parents and what are we doing when
how you're engaging parents.
That's right.
In strip search.
So we've now said that for every strip search, whether that's in custody or an MTIP search, we must submit that child coming to notice form. And we've run that successfully in CE. That's now across the Met. We've also, in Hackney, we've also introduced in Hackney for all stop searches that if a child is stop searched, we will write to the parents so they are aware that that has taken place. There is further work ongoing around appropriate adults and how we get the appropriate adult. As I say, it's not as straightforward as it perhaps would be nice to be, but it is challenging. So we're looking at how do we bring the parents into the conversation. And I've got a lot of examples where these have been conducted and the parents have been at custody and they've been very supportive because they recognise that whilst it is a very unpleasant experience, no question, we are then able to refer to appropriate agencies with that evidence and the parents understand and are able to intervene. That broader question, obviously, you know, there are many conversations we need to have, and I'm sure as a new commissioner comes in, they will be very much on top of their agenda.
Okay, and just very finally, just for my and others' information potentially, should a child be in the care of the local authority and so they don't have a parent, they might have a guardian who's not available or in care, how do you engage social services in the absence of a parent or a carer?
We have an appropriate adult service that we would go to if a child is in custody for looked after children. Looked after children is another issue where there are ongoing challenges, and I've been working in that arena for many years, where thresholds of behaviour are lower and often more likely to be criminalised, and that is a broader challenge than just strip search. So we would engage the appropriate adult service, and then how we engage with social services is through that child coming to notice form, where they're now completed every time, so they will go into children's services and each case then will be cited, and that will form part of, where appropriate, a wider multi-agency response to that child.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask Assemblymember Devenish to ask his last question and then Assemblymember Duval. But I really do want to get into volume crime while the Deputy Mayor is still here. Okay, so Assemblymember Devenish.
Thank you. Assistant Commissioner, following the case of child Q, the Met said it will pilot a scheme where strip search involving children will need approval from an inspector. When is this pilot due to commence, please?
So that started on the 1st of April. And that wasn't just now in Hackney. From the 1st of April, we introduced across every single BCU in London that every MTIP search had to be authorised. You have a conversation with your sergeant, then it must be authorised by an inspector. And as of the 4th of July, that is now also the process in custody. So no strip search will be authorised without first being reviewed and authorised by an inspector. So that is now in place across all of the Met.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Assemblymember Duval has very kindly dropped that question, so we can now go into volume crime. Assemblymember Pigeon.
Lovely, thank you. To Assistant Commissioner, robbery, theft and vehicle offences have all risen in the past year, including a 42% increase in theft in inner London. What action is the Met taking in response to this, please?
Thank you. So there's a huge amount of action which I'll go through, but I think important as well to say that whilst we are, and of course we track closely patterns of crime, that robbery, theft, burglary and vehicle offences have been going up this year, but remain below the 2019 pre-COVID baseline. So, and of course, many of those on a sort of, longer term reducing trajectory, a lot of work going on. But in particular, we are particularly focused on a number of areas. So robbery, we have a robbery improvement plan, which looks at how the whole organisation responds effectively, from calls coming in to the appropriate response rapidly to those cases that have just occurred, but also running a number of operations. So the Violent Crime Task Force has tackling street robbery as a top priority. We've been doing an awful lot of work around schools and working with young people to ensure awareness, understanding our hotspots, and Operation Venice, which you may have heard of, I'm sure you have, around moped-enabled robbery and snatch thefts with perpetrators on mopeds, working with our roads policing team as well, tackling that with the local BCUs. So we're currently, we are seeing some improvements, but we are obviously concerned because whilst things reduce through the COVID period and they remain below that pre-COVID period levels, we are concerned about any increase. And of course, every victim of crime deserves justice. So we want to work incredibly hard, and we would like to prevent these offences where we can.
And are you do you look at some of the other forces, other comparable forces, to see if it's a trend they're seeing and how you compare, or whether this is, something that stands out particularly in the Met?
So yes, we do. We do look at other forces. Particularly around violent crime, but also offences like robbery, and particularly weapon-enabled robbery. We do see similar patterns and seasonal variations as well. Of course, lighter evenings, busier nighttime economy, and we certainly look at what might be unique about London, and particularly the concentration of our retail areas and nighttime economy areas. We know the number of tourists, those people who come in who might not necessarily be familiar with the area. We are really focused on what we might do, but also some of our broader work. We've ensured that in our plans to tackle robbery, we've particularly looked at how we ensure women as victims of robbery, and our work on violence against women and girls tracks across effectively, and our use of things like the Street Safe app to ensure people are reporting where they might not feel so safe, and how we tackle that effectively. But Laurence, I know who leads on this in frontline policing, is there anything you'd want to add?
I guess that there's the kind of corporate view around those volume figures, but then there's the local perspective. So every BCU runs local performance meetings monitoring their own local challenges. Clearly our objective is to prevent crime increasing. That is what we're here for. We monitor closely our detection rate, because it's an important part of reducing crime, is ensuring that offenders are brought to justice, particularly for burglaries and robberies, where we know that it's a small number of people commit a large volume of crime. But that problem-solving activity, that working with partners, working with business improvement districts to have a broad response to volume crime. Because we've talked a lot about demand, we have to prioritise. We prioritise where great harm sits. There are alternative ways to deal with some of the other volume crimes, which includes working with our partners. So it's very much a local focus within the BCUs. They're very conscious of volume crime alongside wider Met priorities, and a lot of activity done to monitor and put local initiatives in place.
Thank you. This is the kind of bread and butter of policing, and this is how often people, perhaps the only interaction they have with the police, and so having the right response and a good response is important. Deputy Mayor, in the Mayor's police and crime plan, he committed to improvements to tracking and tackling volume crimes, such as burglary, theft and vehicle offences. As I say, they all have a huge impact on communities. Can you provide any more detail and timescale for this work?
We've been clear in the police and crime plan. It's the tackling of what we call neighbourhood crimes. So, the volume crimes are just an important aspect of the work of the Metropolitan Police, but also in terms of the oversight and scrutiny that we have in MOPAC. It's within the trust and confidence chapter priority, because it really does feed into trust and confidence, and it's what I've talked about previously about the service that Londoners get. So in terms of what in robbery, and if you take robbery, for example, the Mayor has invested significant amounts of money in terms of some of the preventative measures around robbery. We've got a new fund which we are going out to schools with, to work with schools' children to help them be safer, but also try to do some of the prevention work about those who, Louisa has talked about the nighttime economy and Westminster as particular robbery hotspots, but we also know that there are particular problems with robbery of peer-on-peer robbery. So the Mayor has invested in that. In terms of some of the, and I don't know if you also mean antisocial behaviour, but in terms of antisocial behaviour, we committed within the police and crime plan to not just around the recording, and all this is obviously tracked and recorded via the performance reports, but also committed to convening an antisocial behaviour forum across pan-London antisocial behaviour forum across London with the heads of community safety and the Metropolitan Police. That met for the first time recently in the last couple of weeks, and that will be a regular convening of the organisations who can tackle antisocial behaviour at a local level, because obviously it really is local neighbourhood crime. Because I don't disagree with you at all that these are crimes that really impact on burglary, robbery, vehicle theft, and antisocial behaviour, really impact on day-to-day lives of Londoners. You know, I was woken up the other day because somebody was stealing my neighbour's catalytic converter, and it had a real impact on them. And of course it does. It's, you know, so.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. We'll come into more detail on antisocial behaviour in a minute. Can I just ask the Assistant Commissioner, data from the Home Office shows that over 94% of bicycle theft cases in London were unsolved by the Met in 2021, second worst record of any police service in the country. Given the focus from the Mayor, from City Hall, on encouraging active travel, making London this welcoming place for cyclists, how are you working with TfL, boroughs and others to tackle this issue? And will you look at what other police services, such as, I know, Lancashire and Hampshire, when they use things like bait bikes as a tool to try to catch people who are stealing bikes in the capital?
So, yes, I mean, really something that affects, you know, if you rely on your bicycle to get to work and your bicycle disappears, hugely impactful on people, often quite high value, often very difficult to solve for policing in terms of, you know, if it's taken from an area where there is very little sort of opportunity in terms of CCTV, and if people use, so we do an awful lot in terms of prevention activity, particularly with, for example, you know, TfL, but also universities and common places where people will use their bike, but also we run, you know, our neighbourhood teams are out across London. I see them, you know, I see on Twitter regularly they're running bike marking events, which we advertise. We often do jointly with partners as well, because that can help us when we stop somebody on a stolen bicycle to trace it. You know, we'll work with those who might deal in second-hand bicycles. In terms of specific operational activity, I don't have that information. Laurence may, but if he doesn't, we can write to you with
given the time, we'd get more detail. But I just think, given that worst of any police service in the country and the focus, it might be an area of work. But perhaps give us some more detail in writing on that. And then also looking at that Home Office data, quite staggeringly, the Met closed 89% of car theft cases in 2021 without even identifying a suspect. Again, worst record of any service in the country. What urgent work are you doing in that area for those who've had their car stolen in the capital?
Yeah, so we've been doing a number of things on vehicle crime, and whilst it remains just below pre-pandemic levels, we are very concerned about this. And, you know, having your vehicle stolen is a hugely impactful issue, and we know that it will affect more Londoners than violent crime. And whilst it may not hit the headlines in the way that violent crime does, if your car is stolen, it's hugely impactful on you and your family, and often you know, one of the highest value things that you may own. So huge issue for people. We've been working with the Behavioural Insights team commissioned by the Home Office, looking at behavioural strategies to prevent vehicle crime. 400 streets in London have been focused on to design out motor vehicle crime. We've been running a number of proactive operations that have been very successful around catalytic converter theft. We've been quite successful in that, and identified a number of gangs who've been targeting that particular crime. We've been working with vehicle manufacturers and security companies to design out crime and improve anti-theft capabilities for owners. And the example is Toyota, who've moved catalytic converters to be part of the engine. And the majority of manufacturers now have started to etch VIN numbers onto converters to ensure that they're identifiable. Because, of course, if you recover this, there are things that you can help us with as well, and others, in terms of, you know, from my work in the West Midlands, and I know this is an issue in the Met as well, there is something about the way that the insurance industry operates in its write-off of vehicles. So many years ago, you'll all recall, the insurance companies used to, if your car was written off, it had to be scrapped for parts. That rarely happens these days, and cars are often sold again through auction. They will have a categorisation as a car that's, you know, repairable or not, but they'll be categorised. Often, you know, they have significant issues with them, like airbags are not operable. We know that inscrutable people will, you know, criminals will buy them for cash at auction, and will then ensure that parts or other cars are stolen for parts to rebuild them. And these are often high value, Audi, BMW, Range Rover, and it will drive vehicle crime and theft of vehicles. It will drive the phenomenon of chop shops, and it will mean that cars that are then unsafe are rebuilt and put on the road, you know, they'll just switch off the things in the engine management system that say the airbags are not there or not working, and somebody innocent may buy that for several £1,000s. And I know that these chop shops can, you know, and these things are incredibly difficult to solve if cars are stolen, and we do lots of things to prevent keyless theft. I know that policing nationally through the MPCC have done work with sites like eBay and Amazon to ensure that people can't readily buy kit to clone keys or to get access to vehicles. There's a huge amount of work going on to prevent this, but there is definitely more that can be done around, you know, ensuring that people can't buy cars for cash at auction, ensuring the industry, the insurance industry, if a car should be scrapped, it's broken up for parts and it can't be sold on and rebuilt when it's unsafe, because those things will and also, you know, within this there will be exploitation of young people. I know I've seen in other forces young people who, you know, desperately paid pennies or paid in food to steal cars to order to fuel this kind of crime. You know, it's a horrific issue that has a huge impact on people. And in terms of the Met working with other forces, so at the end of June, we hosted the National Motor Vehicle Crime Conference. All national leads and manufacturers were there, sharing learning, providing training, and particular emphasis on keyless theft and catalytic converters. So there's a lot going on. But also, you know, through our work with the TDIU, looking at how we ensure that victims of vehicle theft, you know, if your car is stolen, that whilst many want their crime reference number, you know, being really clear about why there's little to be gained from us attending an empty street or empty driveway from which your car's been taken, but reassuring people that their car details will appear on the police national computer, that, you know, that if it's seen anywhere in the UK, if it travels through an ANPR camera, it will ping if it tries to leave the country. Now, of course, we know that some people will put on cloned plates, but actually there are many things we do that our crime pattern analysis looks at, you know, identification of those 400 streets that we can focus on. So lots of work going on at a very sort of, you know, working with manufacturers through to local initiatives and operations to tackle this.
I think it'd be interesting if you could write us a detail of the streets bit you were talking about, how you're trying to design that out on streets. I'd be interested in looking at that. Finally, I'll quickly start to move on to the topic of antisocial behaviour. So ASB calls the Met actually decrease by 38% in the year to the end of May 2022. Why do you think that is?
I think we're still working to understand that. I think, you know, we do know that, you know, there can be a connection between antisocial behaviour and other forms of crime, particularly drug dealing, drug use. When we identify our hotspots of antisocial behaviour, we often find a significant overlay with other criminality, which is why, going back to my point earlier about crime recording, it's really important we have accurate crime recording here, that we understand what's going on, that we can work effectively to problem solve. But we know, you know, if you are a victim of antisocial behaviour, it can be horrible, and you want to be reassured that the police are responding effectively. But also we know that you know, parts of London have been less busy through the pandemic and they're not quite back up to full capacity, and we do know some of that has had an impact. Bits of the nighttime economy where this may be focused, not quite as busy as they were pre-pandemic, so we think there may be some, but of course we're still working to understand why that's reducing. We know that, you know, the HMIC finding was about the conversion of incidents, which we are confident are recorded into crimes. So we know we're capturing the incidents. So we don't think this is about us, any massaging of figures or inaccuracy in our recording. This is about, you know, we're not having the reports coming in and we're seeking to understand why.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Assemblymember Devonish.
Deputy Mayor, last question for the morning. What does the Mayor's vision to develop a more coordinated pan-London perspective on antisocial behaviour actually involve, please? And how does it relate to the Met's ASB early intervention scheme?
Practically, what will happen in terms of delivering that commitment is the Pan-London Forum that I've spoken about, which is has already met and includes and has had it was a well attended meeting with over 50 people at it. with the heads of community safety coordinators and the Metropolitan Police. So that's what the Pan London approach looks like. We are looking at what we need to put on the dashboards. We already publish the police recorded data. We will have a look at what's, in terms of locally at borough level, what would be good to ensure that we have understanding of. And also, through the London Crime Prevention Fund, we fund a number of initiatives tackling antisocial behaviour. Croydon, Havering, Waltham Forest have all got, those are 3 examples of really good projects and programmes, one of which is around working with Year 6 pupils around prevention and give them an understanding of the impact of antisocial behaviour. So through the London Crime Prevention Fund as well, we're delivering and investing in services through the boroughs to tackle antisocial behaviour.
Thank you very much. And to the Met, what impact has the antisocial behaviour early intervention scheme had on both communities and victims? And can I just make a personal constituency plea that particularly in Earl's Court I'm getting more and more and more visible, blatant drug dealing on the street, and literally every day, and to quote one resident, there is no visible policing of what the Met call low-level crime, but it's really painful for the community. Thank you.
I'll start, but I know Laurence will have things to say on this as well. So that's really disappointing to hear, because our focus around the growth in officer numbers coming into the Met so far has been very geared towards local policing, investment in neighbourhoods and town centre teams, because we absolutely believe in the value of building stronger relationships with our communities, visible policing, and ensuring that we tackle and problem solve the things that affect Londoners and affect quality of life, but also securing justice for victims. So this is something really disappointing to hear, and I will want to go away and look at that. But Laurence, is there something you want to add?
I was just going to comment on the first part of your question around the effectiveness of early intervention. I think where it works well, it's incredibly effective. I think communities see action being taken. The use of criminal behaviour orders, community protection, warnings are different approaches to address behaviour, and where that behaviour is addressed, it is definitely having an impact on trust and confidence. And where you align that with positive action initiatives, with volunteers, and increasing that visibility, where we do those surveys at the beginning and at the end, we see a really clear increase in trust and confidence. We need to work harder. There is more we need to do around that visible presence on the streets, and clearly we can look at specific examples. But I have got many, many examples where the different approach to tackling ASB and that use of early intervention has had an impact both on the antisocial behaviour itself and the trust and confidence in those local communities. So there are some real positives there, and something that we can expand further.
Leave it there because of time, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, Sophie, before you go, we have got other questions for you in here, and we'll put those in writing to you. Can you also ask for more? Can I ask you for more information on the Pan London ASB Forum? For an example, who is leading it and how often it meets, its priorities and who's on it, etc. Can you send us details on all of that? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Assembly Member Ahmed.
Thank you very much, Chair. Before I go into more detail with my question, I wonder whether it would be helpful for the Met to define what you mean by antisocial behaviour.
Can I? Yes, I agree. It would. I think there is something else that we've been looking at recently, as well as around the reporting, and whether a member of the public say it's ASB or a crime. I think that's for us to determine whether the crime has been committed. What's important is we are told, and people need to have confidence to report antisocial behaviour in whatever form that might be. And then that we demonstrate we do something with it. And we've talked about that early intervention and other activity that we do locally. It has a huge impact on communities. You are right. There is a definition of antisocial behaviour. I haven't got it off the top of my head, I'm afraid, but we can certainly provide what we work to. But I think there is a difference between how we then describe our actions to the public, and I'm not sure the public should be overly concerned whether it's antisocial behaviour, whether it's crime, whether it's something bothering them. They need to tell us, and then we deal with that.
If I can interrupt, so perhaps you could give some examples of what you would regard as antisocial behaviour, rather than the definition in its own right.
It can be anything from noise, nuisance neighbours, rowdy, inconsiderate behaviour, vehicle nuisance, so scooters driving up and down the road making noise. It's really it's things that impact on quality of life, that can be a combination of behaviours and or crimes that collectively have an impact on an individual or a community.
Right, thank you. To both the Deputy Mayor and to the Met, do you think it's the case that given the complaints made by the HMIC around the non-recording of ASB, that Londoners don't report ASB because they think it's a waste of time? Deputy Mayor, would you like to start?
I think I'm not trying to dodge that question, because actually over COVID we actually saw a really significant increase in antisocial behaviour calls into the Met. And I think one of the answers for why is it decreased is because we've come out of that, we've come out of the pandemic, and a lot of the calls are around non-compliance with the regulations and coming into the Met and they were being looked at through ASB. I'm not trying to dodge the question. I genuinely think we need to do some work around why, is there under-reporting of antisocial behaviour, and actually the incidence of antisocial behaviour at a local level are much stronger. There's far more incidents. We will look at some of this through our public attitude survey, and we will look at this through some of the hyper-local surveys that we will undertake, especially in relation to the antisocial behaviour that's Tony Assemblymember Devonish is no longer in the room, but especially in relation to the antisocial behaviour that's associated with drug dealing, because it's such a it has such a huge impact on families and individuals. So.
Okay, thank you. Assistant Commissioner, did you want to add to that?
Then classified them as crimes. Now that's really important, we must get that right, but recording those incidents, that has then driven activity, it's driven analysis, and we do audit this ourselves at the moment, and it's something that we take very seriously. We've got a central team who look at our core handling of antisocial behaviour calls, but also our recording standards, and we have a monthly performance pack that goes to each of our borough superintendents who lead on antisocial behaviour locally. But as the Deputy Mayor has said, we are very focused on the connection between, and often we do know that many people do not want to bother statutory agencies, whether it's the NHS or the police, about something that they themselves might consider minor. But we would encourage people to report because it helps us understand a pattern. And particularly, we've got some great examples of how we've, for example, used the early intervention scheme, where an antisocial behaviour reports were made numerously that related to drug dealing, and it was one person severely impacting the quality of life across people across a number of areas of London. We'd identified through our analysis the connection between these calls about antisocial behaviour. We started the early intervention scheme. The person received a community protection warning, then a community protection notice. When they breached that, we got a criminal behaviour order, and it led to considerable reduction in antisocial behaviour. So, positive impact for people. So I think really important that we are very focused on this. We will be addressing the issues around crime recording, but also, for me, leading on violence against women and girls, I want to understand how this overlays with, whether that's street harassment or women feeling unsafe in parts of London too. So really important we look at this as a big picture of crime and behaviour.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, can I just, Chair, I am really sorry, but I really do need to go, and I will explain to you privately what I need to go and do, but it is the first time I've ever left PCC early, so I hope you will and allow me to go.
Deputy Mayor, very often the Commissioner insists on leaving early
Yes.
as well, so it isn't the
So I do
first time
apologise.
you've gone. If there's a good reason, it's a great pity you didn't explain to me before the meeting. Okay, do you want to continue?
Thank you, Chair. Tackling antisocial behaviour often requires a collaborative approach between not only the police but also the fire service, local authorities and community groups. How are you working effectively with other organisations to not only address and stop antisocial behaviour but to prevent it as well?
So we have got some examples of really good partnership working. One from our Central East BCU, where teams worked alongside the London Borough of Tower Hamlets Drugs Intervention Programme and Turning Point to provide a more holistic approach to support those involved in antisocial behaviour, particularly tackling the misuse of drugs and vulnerability through addiction. It's gone now further into a diversion scheme strategy with our drug intervention programmes, with charities supporting young people and adults on the periphery of drug misuse and violent crime. So, you know, that's a piece of work focused initially on antisocial behaviour, which has become very focused on preventing crime and early intervention supporting vulnerable people. There will be numerous examples of that across London, but of course there's always more we can do.
So, as an Assembly member and both previously as a councillor, one of the biggest issues in my inbox was actually about nuisance neighbours, and you identified that as antisocial behaviour and something that you would look at as antisocial behaviour. And that there seems to be a real confusion about what is the police role and what is the local authorities' role. I wonder if you could just explain. So there is a process where perhaps the police might attend. At what point does it become the local authority's responsibility, and how then is the police still keeping an eye on the situation?
So this can be very complex, and but also, you know, if matters are, for example, purely a matter of noise nuisance, you have a noisy neighbour, then often, you know, a matter of noise nuisance would be something that would be within the remit of the local authority, and we would seek to work with partners. No, but we would always want to ensure that, you know, are there issues behind this of somebody being particularly vulnerable? Are there matters of, you know, is there something more going on? Is there crime? And we would look to work in partnership with others. You know, if people are housed by the local authority or by a housing association, or it might be that they're in supported accommodation, we would want to ensure that and we would expect our local neighbourhood team to work effectively with partners to address what might be a matter of, you know, it could be minor nuisance, or it could be, you know, people are particularly vulnerable or feeling particularly threatened. And, you know, where this becomes a crime or a persistent matter of antisocial behaviour, then policing would be involved. But there are grey areas here. This isn't something that's very straightforward, and, you know, police officers are very good at applying their discretion, and we trust our officers to go out and look to, you know, they're great problem solvers, and often these things require, you know, there isn't a simplistic approach. We require our officers to go out to use their discretion, to work effectively with others, to seek to problem solve, because what we will find, and certainly this was one of the bits of learning from the pandemic, where our officers were driving London ambulances when they were facing particular pressure, is that our officers came back and reported to me that they spent an awful lot of time visiting the same people that we were called to, who were very vulnerable. The solution was not an emergency ambulance. It was not a police officer. These people often required a much more complex solution through joint working with many agencies. And actually, I think working effectively together, and you know, this is why our analysis of repeat calls, particularly antisocial behaviour, can be so important.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, colleagues. Assembly Member Prince, your next question was to the Deputy Mayor. Is there anything else you want asked? If not, I will make sure that goes in writing. I'm so sorry. We've got Assembly Member Garrett and then Assembly Member Moema. Colleagues, I intend to drop Section 60 stop and search and the TDIU, because we've got other work to do after these questioning. Are you all happy that is the case?
Agreed.
And none of us are happy, but it's the only thing we can do. Okay, we'll go straight on to Assembly Member Garrett.
It's quite a short question, actually. I wanted to reprise the point that Assemblymember Pigeon brought up, particularly about bike theft and the impact that that has on people thinking about switching from a car to a bike. And one of the biggest single deterrents is particularly people who are thinking about using an e-bike, which is, I think, a way for a lot of people to get into cycling who aren't normally. The value of those bikes means that people who have them often then are very unwilling to, say, park them in a town centre. So journeys that it might replace a car, it isn't, because of the fear of theft even. And I think there's a sense that, you know, bike thieves sort of operate with impunity, and once your bike is gone, that's it. That's the last you've seen of it. Farewell. So I was quite intrigued to see, this was a report from the Times in March comparing how different police areas had compared. And it would be fair to say that across the board it wasn't great, except for Avon and Somerset, who seemed to be prosecuting 3 times more than the second best authority and 10 times more than the Met Police, who unfortunately are the wooden spoon authority on this. So my question, I don't want to sort of go over the ground that Assemblymember Pigeon had. My question to you, and perhaps you can write to us, is can you look at what they're doing? Because it seems to be fundamentally different from what any other force is doing, and they are actually catching bike thieves. So only 24% of bike thefts in Avon and Somerset, no suspect identified. Every other force is 70% in the second best. The Met, it's virtually never. So, you know, in Avon and Somerset, they're clearly doing something different and right. And I think I'd really be intrigued to know whether we can make some significant strides to be more like them in this area.
Yes, I think that's... thank you for that suggestion. Having spent most of my policing service in Avon and Somerset, I've got plenty of contacts there, and I will speak with them to find out the secret to their success, because that's incredibly impressive for something that I know. And there may be many reasons why our success is different, but that is impressive, and we will want to learn from it. Thank you.
Thank you. As briefly as you can, Assemblymember Hamer, and brief response, please, because of the time.
Thank you. Yeah, so my question possibly is for Laurence. You're in the broad kind of working definition or understanding to a member of the public of what ASB is, cycling through the logic of what your response, which seems reasonable, but it does seem like if you are somebody who your landlord is a social landlord, the police will not attend. No, but your response was that if you're a council or housing association tenant, then you would have some involvement from them. So I wonder what the knock-on effects of that approach might be to somebody who, again, kind of going back to the original starting point of this conversation, that the police need to attend when things happen. I do think a bit of a focus on and clarity around what is your role and what is the role of local authorities, or what is the role of a private landlord if we're talking about things that happen in or around the home, because those are the things which undermine that trust and confidence. The police are absent from those issues. And I just also wanted to ask you, at what point does a member of the public know when to escalate something, or to so you, as a force, people are asked, you ask members of the public to continue to record and report to you issues. I can think cases where people have been recording and reporting for years, and they still suffer from the impact of drug dealing and so on. At what point do you take action and resolve that?
There's going to be a long answer to this because it was a very long question. Can I ask for it in writing, the answer to that? Because if not, you'll speed through an answer and it doesn't give it justification. So mindful of the time. Sorry about that, but I do think we need a proper answer to that, and I'm sure you'd rather give it. So that I'm so sorry about my voice. That brings this part of the proceedings to a close. So I would like to thank our guests for attending the meeting today and for participating in the discussion. And can I point out that we are mindful that the Met is 43,000 people strong. The acts of bravery we see every day don't hit the newspapers. the amount of good work you do don't get featured often in these reports. But I don't want you to think they don't go noticed by us. Our job is to look at where things go wrong. But I do absolutely congratulate the officers 99% of the time, because they work very, very hard. And all of this going on at the moment must be very, very disheartening for all of them. So thank you for answering our questions. Can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion and the monthly report from MOPAC?
Noted.
Thank you. Can we also delegate authority to me as chairman in consultation with party group lead members to agree any output arising from the meeting?
Agreed.
Thank you. We're going to now adjourn for just a couple of minutes before we welcome our next guest. Thank you. Can I now welcome Emma Strain, Monitoring Officer, to the meeting. Emma, would you like to make an opening statement? Thank you.
Assembly Member Hall, I will do, if that's okay. And so I'm here today to talk to you about the paper which I've tabled regarding a complaint received from the Right Honourable Angela Rayner MP on the 14th of November 2021 in response to an article published in The Observer on the same day about the Prime Minister in his capacity as the former Mayor of London. The article concerned extracts from the diaries of Jennifer Arcuri. This report, which I've tabled, provides an update on my initial assessment of the complaint as to whether it should be considered as a serious complaint under the regulations, and sets out the next steps in handling of the complaint. Specifically, Ms Rayner asked that the new evidence is referred to the Independent Office of Police Conduct so they can look again at their decision to rule out a criminal investigation. Mr Johnson's relationship with Ms Arcuri had previously been considered by the IOPC as part of its consideration of a previous conduct matter referred to them in 2019. This original conduct matter provides important context and background to this complaint, and as such I summarise the conduct matter and the IOP's scoping exercise within my report. As required by the regulations and in accordance with the GLA guidance, I formally recorded this complaint, and the next step in this process was to make an initial assessment of the complaint and to decide whether or not it meets the definition of a serious complaint under the regulations. In the regulations, a serious complaint is a complaint made about conduct which constitutes or involves, or appears to constitute or involve, the commission of a criminal offence. In this matter, the relevant offence is misconduct in public office. As set out in the GLA guidance, in order to assist with the initial assessment, I need to obtain information that is readily available. This includes gathering information that's held by the relevant office holder, the GLA or any other person or body, and may include decision forms, emails, and any other documents that are relevant to the complaint. Under the regulations, I am not permitted to create new evidence, for example, by interviewing witnesses. In the report, I detail all the information I've gathered as part of this initial assessment process. The IOPC provided Ms Arcuri's written response to them, which was gathered as part of its initial scoping exercise, and I also gathered some limited information from Ms Arcuri's diaries, as set out in my report. I've also consulted this committee and the IOPC on my report. Based on the information that's readily available, taking into account the view of the IOPC set out in the Lansdowne report, and the information gathered from the IOPC and from Ms Arcuri, there is nothing to suggest that Mr Johnson used his influence to arrange the payments to Ms Arcuri's companies or their access to trade missions. There is nothing to suggest that Mr Johnson made decisions in Ms Arcuri's favour, or that Mr Johnson knew she was using their relationship to obtain benefits but failed to take steps to prevent it. Mr Johnson's conduct does not therefore constitute or involve, or appear to constitute or involve, the commission of the criminal offence of misconduct in public office. Accordingly, the complaint is not a serious complaint, and therefore there is no requirement to refer the complaint to the IOPC. The complaint will not therefore be referred to the IOPC. The GLA's guidance states that a complaint that has been recorded and is not required to be referred to the IOPC is dealt with by me as if it were a written complaint under the GLA ethical standards regime. The GLA's ethical standards regime is set out in the GLA's Code of Conduct for members. It does not apply when a member ceases to hold office, and as such there is no further action I can take in considering whether there has been any potential breach of the Code. Accordingly, no further action will be taken with regard to this complaint. I've advised Mr Johnson and Ms Rayner of this outcome, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have about my report.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? Assembly Member Pigeon.
When you came before us in private session, I asked you to seek out some further information. Yeah. Could you just put on record and clarify that additional information? I think it was dates associated with the diary.
Yes,
extracts.
I did.
So do you want to say a bit more about that in public,
course.
Please?
So, Member Pigeon, you asked me to check some dates regarding to from the information which Mr John Ware showed to me from his copy of papers which included parts of Ms Arcuri's diaries. I went back to him and asked him to provide those dates, and in doing so he provided some further information. That further information is in the appendices to the paper, and that appendices sets out clearly where he provided additional information. And while I took all that into account, it didn't make any material difference. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? No. Okay, thank you, Emma.
Thank you.
Can we note the report, the outcome of the initial assessment and the handling of the complaint? Thank you. Can I ask the committee to note the work programme?
Noted.
Thank you. The next meeting of the committee is scheduled for Wednesday, the 20th of July, 2022 at 10 a.m. in the Chamber City Hall. I have no urgent business, which concludes today's meeting.